Hi. Apple TV's Severance may very well be my favorite television show I have ever watched. And I am willing to lock that in forever. I love this show. It's so good. The first time I ever watched Severance, when I got to the season finale, I was standing up yelling at the screen. That's how captivated I was by this amazing piece of art. Now, Severance is definitely not the show for everybody in the world, but if you like mystery, thriller, suspense, dystopian horror comedy, this might be right up your alley. And watching this show is an experience I do not want to rob from you if you have any interest in watching it. There will be spoilers in this video. Oh my god, I cannot stress that enough. If you've ever had a desire to watch this, or if you like mystery thriller, watch it first. I guarantee you could still get things out of this video even if you've watched the show already, and I just don't want you to miss out, okay? If you are a person who has left a high-demand religion or a cult like myself, I think that you will find Severance very compelling and relatable. It's a big recommend for my ex-religious people out there. I see you. I think you'll really like this show. In this video, what I hope to do is go through the basic plot but point out all of the artistic storytelling that's going on, because so much of this story is told without words. This show is so well done. I could literally sit and talk about every single shot and frame and every minute, and I think that it just deserves some really in-depth commentary and praise. Season 2 is coming out in a couple of months, which is really exciting. Lots of big names in here, by the way. I won't be pointing them all out by name, but you'll see them. Very famous people. Now, you might be wondering, you sponsored by Apple TV? No. Actually, I'm not sponsored. I am just doing this for fun because I'm an insane person. But all y'all folks at Apple TV, like, if you did want to sponsor me though, like, I would literally sell my soul to you. Just let me know. Thanks. Quick content warning. A few of the episodes contain elements of self-harm as well as one character attempting to end their own life. I'm going to touch on it in a very simple and light way, but if that's something that's hard for you to watch, just be aware. All right, enough of my yapping. Let's get into Severance.
Who are you?
Our opening shot features a woman laying down on a desk. There's a friendly voice speaking to her through a monitor, asking her,
Who are you? I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Hi there. You on the table?
We then hear this voice ask if this woman will take a brief 5-question survey.
I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey.
The woman on the table is immediately defiant. She starts pacing around the room, unsure of where she is or why. She tries to get an idea of her surroundings and potentially find an exit by poking around the room, completely ignoring the voice on the monitor. Finally, she relents and agrees to take this 5-question survey.
5 questions. What do I get at the end?
Depends on your answers.
The first question being, who are you?
That's the first question.
And this is the beginning of the incredible acting work that we see in this show. It's clear that the question, who are you, catches her off guard and frightens her because she does not know who she is. She is so good at portraying exactly what she's feeling in a perfectly subtle way. She does this throughout the season. Her acting, incredible. It's incredible. I'm going to be pointing out people's facial expressions a lot in this video because it's apparent that in working on this show, there was a lot of emphasis on the subtlety and the facial expression. And the actors in this show just do such a good job. I can't help but say something about it. Like, I have to point it out because they're phenomenal. This is a phenomenal show. Okay, anyway. The second question is, in which US state or territory were you born?
Wait,
Which state or territory, please?
I don't know.
The third question is, please name any US state or territory.
I don't know. Delaware. What is this?
Delaware. Question 4.
The fourth question is the weirdest of the bunch. What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
That one makes no sense.
Right.
Which obviously she also cannot answer. But remember that question.
What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
There's actually a really good explanation for this question, but it doesn't come up until later. And the fifth question is, what is or was the color of your mother's eyes? Which the woman, again, cannot answer. This time her face showing a look of sadness and terror. The friendly voice in the monitor repeats back to this woman what her answers were.
So that's unknown, unknown, Delaware, unknown, unknown.
There's a brief moment of pause, and then the door of the room, which was previously locked, opens up to a man saying,
That's a perfect score.
Some praise for this opening scene. I think it really captures how cool and amazing the ambiance of this show is, the cinematography, the color and set choices, the costuming choices, the music in this show, the acting, everything is done so well. And you can tell just from this opening scene. We hear someone crying over a dark screen and we fade into a man outside in his car. This man is big time crying. There is definitely something going on with him. What's so cool about the way that this show is structured is we see him crying and we don't get an explanation as to why until later in this episode, and also through snippets throughout the entire season. Seriously, I cannot stress enough how well this show uses the concept of show don't tell to a perfect amount. It's so good. The crying man composes himself and walks through the parking lot to his place of work. As he's walking in, we hear the theme song of this show for the first time. It's so beautiful and so haunting at the same time, and one of my favorite parts of this show is the soundtrack. It is so good.
Are you ready for Mr. Scout?
When he walks inside, we're introduced to a few more mysteries. We know absolutely nothing about this company, but we're shown a few key things in this scene. One, there's really high security protocols at this place. This is a really high-end fancy job. The building is also eerily reverent with really dark color themes throughout. There's a large face engraved on a stone wall. Right off the bat, we're getting little peeks into the fact that something is a little bit off with this company. We follow our employee down the stairs to an area labeled Severed Access. He walks up to a locker and switches out some of his items, which are really interesting. He switches out his watch for one that has no numbers or date on it at all. He also switches out his name badge for one that is plain blue with no markings on it, just the symbol of the company. Mr. Scout walks onto the elevator, which is shown with a down arrow above it, meaning that this elevator goes further into the basement of the building. And you might be thinking, duh, obviously, why would you point that out? It's a down arrow, the elevator goes down. It's important. Okay, and I'm not going to explain it yet. As we observe Mr. Scout going down the elevator, we see his expression change. I don't know how they did this cool camera trick with his face in the elevator, but it's amazing. As Mr. Scout exits the elevator, the music changes. There's more of an upbeat tone, and he begins walking down a corridor of white hallways. And he walks for a while, so we get to see the sheer expanse of this underground office that he is working in. I actually love the design of this office and what they chose to do with the white walls. It gives the room a very liminal feeling, a very backrooms feeling, if you will. And I don't know if this was intentional or not, but there's something about liminal spaces that cause people to feel a weird sense of unease, like the uncanny valley, but also a weird sense of familiarity and comfort. I think the design of these hallways allows us to experience that feeling of a little bit unsettled, but a little bit at ease, not really sure what we're looking at, and I love it. Mr. Scout walks up to a door labeled Macro Data Refinement. He enters a large room with a big green floor and a tiny little cubicle in the middle. He sits down at his desk and turns on a light-up glass cube which has his face and name on it. And this is where we learn his name is Mark S, or Mark Scout. The glass cube ends up being something that is important later in the show. It's subtle, but it's another little mystery that we have to look forward to. At first, it seems like Mark is alone in the office until we hear some hilarious office banter coming from his coworker named Dylan.
You sick?
Maybe. Petey was sniffling yesterday.
If you breathe on me, I'll rip your larynx out.
While this show is a workplace dystopian mystery thriller, it is also a comedy. Dylan is definitely the comedic relief character of The Office. Dylan has so many one-liners and moments that are just hilarious.
I feel like ripping out my germ-ridden larynx would get you sicker than just me breathing.
Nah, endorphins.
We hear them chatting about a guy named Petey who seems like someone that everyone is fond of in the office. Petey has not showed up yet today, which is not normal. And then we meet Irving. Irving has a little catchphrase he says every time he comes to the office.
Hi, kids. What's for dinner?
This catchphrase has been something that's consistent and persistent enough to be annoying to the other coworkers.
Did the kids make you dinner in this scenario, or?
Yeah, what kind of a shit dad are you?
Irving is very clearly a tight ass from the start. There's a weird sense of tension around him. He seems to be more serious, not quite participating in the office banter as much as Dylan and Mark are.
Put in an honest day's work and not get a children's breakfast in return.
Oh, uh-oh, Irv's got claws today.
We are then introduced to a character called Mr. Milchick.
Good morning, macro data refinement.
Hi, Mr. Milchick.
And this man is creepy as hell. If you weren't already feeling a little bit weird by everything you've seen, this man is going to make you feel unsettled almost immediately.
Mark, could I have a word?
As Mr. Milchick is escorting Mark through the hallways, he brings up Miss Cobell's new office, who is the big boss lady. They have a really strange, almost robotic conversation.
Last time you saw Miss Cobell, she was in her old office. Now she's in her new office. It's a completely different office. She'd never say so, but I know a compliment about the office would just make her day.
And then we meet Miss Cobell, who... Can I just say, her performance in this show is absolutely stunning. This woman is unironically on my list of celebrity crushes. In my opinion, she's one of the most interesting and compelling characters written into this show, and we will get into that.
Nice office.
Ugh, it's horrid.
Yeah, the old one was better.
Immediately, Miss Cobell is not positive about the office space change. She is not positive toward Mark. She insults him right off the bat.
Oh, you look awful. You look hungover.
He has such a funny aura about him throughout the show, but especially when he's interacting with his boss, Miss Cobell, there's just a really funny dynamic. This meeting with Miss Cobell is not about the goofs and giggles. This meeting is very serious. There's a speaker put between Mark and Miss Cobell indicating that the board is listening on this conversation. The board will not be contributing to the meeting vocally. The board is referenced quite a lot in this show while never actually revealed. It's one of those mysteries that's going to have to go into the next season.
I assume this is about me acting as department chief today. I've subbed for PD before, so it shouldn't be that big a thing.
PD is no longer with this company.
This comes as a shock to Mark because there was no warning that he was going to be leaving. We also get a remark from Mr. Milchick where he points out that Mark and Petey were his favorite office friendship, which is another thing that's just so creepy. Just listen to the way that he says this.
I'm sorry, Mark. You guys were one of my favorite office friendships.
It's so unsettling, and I love it. Mark has now been officially appointed department chief, with a handshake available upon request.
Thank you, may I have a handshake?
Mark just seems to immediately meld into this new role of department chief like he was born for it. He has this air of calm and confidence about him as if he's kind of excited for this new role. An important part of Mark's new job is that he will be onboarding the new employee who's going to replace Petey. This is where we jump back to the opening of this episode, but this time from Mark's perspective from the soundproofed and locked interrogation room. We now get a whole new perspective on the woman from the beginning of the show. She is a new employee at this company. This woman's name is Helly.
Who are you?
It's oddly kind of comforting to see this whole situation from Mark's perspective, where he's excited and nervous to be doing this new job for the first time. Mark goes into the office room to talk to Helly after she passes her 5-question survey. He's like super cute, trying to read everything from the binder.
I can sense that the questions made you feel afraid or disoriented. The good news is you're at an orientation.
And this woman is just not okay. Meanwhile, Mark is just trying to maintain an air of positivity and excitement, but it's not really rubbing off on Helly.
Imagine yourself as a seesaw. Ow! That lock's from out there!
Let me out!
Mark drops the act with the binder and tries to relate to Helly by telling his own story. He woke up on the desk a few years ago, and the voice he heard over the speaker was Petey. He was so confused and terrified that he threatened to find and kill Petey, but then later they became best friends. Mark attempts to explain why she's there and what something called Severance is, but Helly is just not having it. She wants out.
Let me the fuck out of here!
Mark relents, hinting at her that she needs to ask to be let out again. The rules are if she asks 3 times to be let go, they can leave the office and go to the stairwell where she can exit.
I would like to leave the building now.
We follow Mark and Helly to the emergency stairwell, but Mark stays around the corner so he can't watch Helly leave, which is super weird. He follows this rule blindly as if it's just normal. Helly notices this is weird and makes a snide remark toward him.
I just can't watch you leave.
Of course you can't.
And this is where the storytelling begins to show us how culty and strange this company is. Mark is just blindly following a strange rule. He doesn't really know the reason why. He just knows he's not allowed to watch her leave. And he acts as if it's no big deal at all. As Helly exits the stairwell, from her perspective, we see her pushing the door to leave and then immediately pushing the door to go back in. Helly is confused and disoriented and decides to try again. She pushes the door out to the stairwell and then immediately is pushing the door back into the office. From Mark's perspective, the timing is very different. Mark is standing around the corner and we get to see Helly walk out. We pause for a moment and then she walks back in. When Helly exits the office, something weird is happening to her perception of time and space.
Am I dead?
No.
This isn't like hell or something?
Helly asks why she can't leave, while Mark responds with,
Well, you did leave just now. Out into the stairwell, at least. You left, but you came back.
I did not.
You did.
Helly has to have a conversation with Miss Cobell where she's told that there is only one part left of her orientation, which is a video. Helly leaves and Mark goes to talk to Cobell again, asking if she's mad at him. And this is where we start to see her crazy come out.
Are you mad at me?
For the incompetence or the disobedience?
Well,
Yes! I love this woman. Helly sits down to watch her orientation video where we learn what this is all about. The video is of herself a few hours prior, reading a disclosure statement to the camera.
I have, of my own free accord, elected to undergo the procedure colloquially known as severance.
And this is where we learn exactly what severance is and how the procedure works.
I give consent for my perceptual chronologies to be surgically split.
Severance is a procedure done to someone's brain that causes their memories to be spatially dictated, meaning that whenever she enters the space of the office, she cannot remember her life from home, and when she leaves the office, she can't remember anything she did at work. So Helly and the other severed employees have outside lives, but they have no idea who they are or anything about their life, which explains the change in Mark when he went through the elevator. So essentially, a severed worker is a person who exists solely in this office and never gets to experience a night or a weekend break away from work. This is such a fascinating concept to me because we see throughout the show that this severed worker is essentially an entirely different person from the person on the outside, even though they share the same body. And what they do with this, it's so cool. It's so cool. Okay, back to the story. At the end of his workday, Mark heads back to the elevator, which has an up arrow on it. He's going back up. We see him transition back into his regular old normal person life, and a couple interesting things happen on his way out of the office. As he walks back to his car, Mark sees a note left on his car from the company explaining the injury on his forehead. The explanation is included with a gift card to a place called Pips, and the explanation is clearly a lie. We clearly saw that Helly chucked a speaker at his head, so... Also in the parking lot, Mark almost runs over Helly, and they clearly do not remember each other. Mark drives home, and we finally get some insight into who this person even is. And let me tell you, it's pretty boring. We see him pop open a beer and sit on the couch while he watches TV for the rest of his Friday evening. Something very cool they put in the background here, which I'm obsessed with. I love it. There are 2 separate fish tanks right next to each other, both with a betta fish inside. One is red and one is blue. And this is clearly symbolic of the severance procedure, how he has a version of himself outside of work and a version of himself inside of work. But there's even more symbolism than just the 2 separate fish in the different fish tanks. The colors of red and blue are actually really significant here as well. Whoever did the costuming and aesthetic design was brilliant. Blue was chosen very intentionally to be the color to represent this company, which is called Lumen. Throughout the show, you're going to see that a dark royal blue or navy blue is consistently used for the employees and people at Lumen. The red is what's really interesting interesting to me. Red represents the outside world. But here's the thing. While the color red represents the outside world, we don't actually see a lot of this bright red color. The outside world is often shown with very earthy, dark, wooded themes. Vast contrast to the bright liminal space of the severed floor. The times in this show that we're actually shown like a bright red color, it's done very deliberately. One instance I can think of where the color red is pretty deliberately used is in the intro to the show. The intro is like a super crazy, trippy sequence. We follow a version of Mark that's wearing these bright red pajamas while wearing his blue Lumen badge. This portrayal of Mark is portrayed as the inside work self version of Mark, but he's wearing bright red pajamas. So there's kind of an intermixing of the characters here, which leads me to believe that the color red is deliberately used in times that Mark is being led further to truth or to unifying who he is. The more red we see portrayed in the show, the closer we are to uncovering truth. The colors are communicating a whole supporting message underneath the surface, and it's just so fun. It's so fun. Saturday morning, we hear Mark talking to his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, on the phone.
No, I know, Mrs. Selvig. It's just, it was in my space again.
Talking to her about the garbage bins and how she keeps putting her garbage bin in his garbage bin spot. And the way he's talking to her sounds like he's had this conversation with her many times.
Well, trash comes tomorrow night. Tonight's recycling.
Communicating with Mrs. Selvig about the trash is one of his few social interactions he gets. Saturday evening, there's a knock at the door. He opens the door to a woman who's looking at him very expectantly. She then asks if he forgot about the event she's taking him to, which he did.
Sorry.
That's fine. Do you want to put on pants and I'll
I'm wearing pants.
meet with those are not pants.
This woman is Mark's sister. Her name is Devin, and she's amazing. They clearly have a very close-knit sibling relationship, and it's so cute to watch them interact.
So, if there's no dinner, how is it dinner? Like,
You actually owe me this.
do I?
Yep.
There's not a lot of shows that I've seen that portray sibling relationships like this. They have really fun, comfortable banter with each other. It just feels really natural, and you can tell that they're close just from the little interaction we get to see.
Oh, you got a gift card. Where's he going to?
Pips.
Of course it's Pips.
We get another hint into Mark's life with Devin talking to him in the car. She mentions that today is the anniversary of something, and we are shown, not told, that it's the anniversary of something tragic by Devin saying that she just thought he wouldn't want to be alone on this day.
We're nearing the anniversary, so I just thought maybe you'd want to be around people.
Nope.
Such good writing. We get to Devin's house and we meet her husband, Rickon, who is another one of the characters that's just there for pure comedic relief, and I love him.
Ugh, you, sir, look at peace.
The event happening at Devin and Rickon's house that night is a really quirky dinner event where they actually don't have food. It's just a feast of friendship, if you will. We're introduced to a couple new characters, some of Rickon and Devin's friends, more likely Rickon's friends. They're all very pretentious, eccentric people, and it's just so entertaining to watch them interact with each other.
And then you've got food, which is what?
Yes, what is
Fuel.
In this conversation, we learn that Mark used to be a history teacher who taught mainly about World War I. Later in the show, it's confirmed that he worked at a university, not just like as a high school teacher. We also learn that Mark's wife passed away and that her name is Gemma. They start talking about the company Lumen, where Mark works, and the severance procedure is brought up. When the other people at dinner learn that Mark is severed, there's this silence, almost like a collective gasp.
Well, that's something, isn't it?
Almost like he's coming out about this information. And this is where we get to see some of the politics surrounding this procedure.
And then suddenly it's 5 and you're leaving.
Well, they stagger us a little.
And then, conversely,
From this interaction, it's very clear that Mark being severed is a really big deal to society at large. They start speculating about what it's like to be severed and thinking about the other one at work.
so in effect, that version of you is trapped there.
You've essentially created another person who is trapped in that office, and their only purpose is to work for you. And politically, this is viewed almost like slavery.
The point is that Mark made a decision, and that decision was controversial, ethically, socially, morally, scientifically.
After the non-dinner is over and everyone has left, we see Mark talking with Devin. In this conversation, we learn that Mark actually accepted the job at Lumen to become a severed worker because his wife passed away. Something we learn in a few more episodes that I'm just going to explain right now because it just makes sense for this video. Mark tried to go back to work 3 weeks after his wife passed away, and he was such a mess that he could not handle his job. So he took a severed job because he thought that it would help him to actually function in society if he can just shut his brain off half the day and go to work and forget about his wife while he's working and then come home to deal with the grief. Going back to what Devin said about this day being an anniversary, today in the story marks the 2-year anniversary from the day that Mark's wife Gemma passed away. Mark also mentions that it's been 2 years that he's been working at Lumen. Devin insists that Mark spends the night at their house, and I mean, he doesn't really have a choice because she drove him there, but he spends the night.
You're definitely staying here tonight.
No, I'm not.
I'm making all the bed sheets myself.
We get to see something pretty funny here about Rickon. This man is extremely eccentric, not just eccentric in his mannerisms, but also in his beliefs and behavior. Devin is currently pregnant, and we get a little insight into how they're setting up their child's room. The room has 3 beds. And the reason is that Rickon read something somewhere that a child gets traumatized when their bed is switched out. So if you just introduce all 3 beds to the child when they're born, they can move across the room as they are ready to progress into a new bed. And Mark sleeps in the race car toddler bed, which is really funny. In the middle of the night, Mark wakes up and goes to grab a glass of water. He looks out the window of his sister's house to see a man in a suit standing in the woods. There's a moment where they stare at each other, and then a light passes by and the man in the woods runs away. From our perspective and the little information we have about this universe so far, we know that Petey did not show up to work today, and now there's a businessman standing in the woods. So we have the inkling that this man standing there looking at Mark knowingly is in fact Petey, but Mark doesn't know that yet. He tells Devin about the businessman in her yard in the morning, and she seems surprisingly chill about it.
He looked at me weird, like he knew me.
Oh, did the prowler invading my home make you feel seen?
So seen.
She then accuses Mark of smelling like alcohol, and we get this really funny quip.
I'm sorry, I just had to drown out the memory of Mom and Dad switching out my beds when we were kids.
Probably one of my favorite jokes in the show. Later that night, Mark goes to use his VIP gift card to Pips that he got from Lumen. While he's sitting and waiting for his food, he's once again on the phone with Mrs. Selvig, talking about the bins.
Recycling was last night, tonight's garbage, and you keep putting your bin on my side.
Mrs. Selvig seems to be very, very nosy and potentially a little bit senile.
Excuse me. Hang up. Quickly.
Petey then shows up and says to Mark,
Hi, kids. What's for dinner?
Which, if you remember, that was Irving's quip that he says every day at work. Mark clearly has no idea what he's talking about. Petey explains that he's from work and he knows Mark. Mark tells him that's impossible because he's severed and severance is permanent. Petey explains he managed to undo the severance procedure with help from someone. Petey also explains to Mark that they had both filed complaints as their severed selves to try and quit their jobs. But due to the look of confusion on Mark's face, those complaints were clearly never delivered. Again, giving us a little peek into how Lumen has been lying to Mark. They have an ominous conversation. Mark asks if Petey thinks he's being hunted, and Petey says yes, essentially, and that someone named Mr. Grainer is probably looking for him. He then hands a red envelope to Mark and says to him, "Nothing down there is what they say," which is again an interesting usage of the color red. It's very deliberate. This interaction with Petey also shows us a couple more really interesting things.
Your voice is different here. Worse.
Something else Petey says that comes across as a funny quip, but I actually think is really important for the storytelling. Mark asks if he and Petey are friends. Petey replies,
I'm your best friend. You're my very good friend.
And I'll get into it a little bit later why exactly I think that that line is a really significant storytelling point. Petey leaves abruptly out of fear he's being followed. And afterward, we see Mark sitting in his car where he opens up this note from Petey. The note to him essentially says, there's stuff going on that you probably want to know about, but if you don't want to know, I'm not going to force you. He provides an address on the back of the card of where to find him. While Mark is reading this note, we catch a brief glimpse out of his car to another car where we see a man sitting there. And this we can assume from what Petey said is Mr. Grainer. That night, Mark is taking out the trash and we meet Mrs. Selvig face to face for the first time. At first, we're just shown the back of her head and her beautiful silvery gray hair. Mark says goodnight and we finally see Mrs. Selvig's face, and it is indeed Miss Cobell. At first, you might be tempted to think that Miss Cobell is also a severed employee, but we are shown very quickly that that is not the case. As the camera lingers, there's just an ever so slight shift in her face. She knows what's going on. And the episode ends. It's so good! Okay, I went into a ton of detail about episode 1 because there's a lot of things that are really important and that I need to talk about. I'm gonna try not to go into as much detail on the rest of the episodes. I'm gonna do my best, but there's just so much that is so fun and I want to talk about it all. Anyway, let's get into episode 2. The beginning of episode 2 is really cool. It's one of my favorite paradigm shift moments of the show, where we get to see Helly on the outside before she got her severance procedure. On the way to the operating room, they stop and look up at the carving on the wall. The way that Milchick talks about this man is so creepy and so culty.
I love seeing the sunrise on his face.
This man is Mr. Egan. The reason we know this is because Mr. Milchick talks about his favorite breakfast, which is 3 raw eggs in milk every morning.
His favorite breakfast.
Despite the fact that that's a really gross favorite breakfast to have, seems like this is actually part of the severance procedure, where seemingly randomly, Mr. Milchick on the outside mentions,
You know, he used to drink 3 raw eggs and milk each morning. His favorite breakfast.
as a way to test if the severance procedure actually worked.
What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
It's just one of those things you might miss if you haven't watched it 8 times, you know? They show Helly in the operating room getting her severance procedure done, which is pretty gross. They show the surgery process of them inserting the chip into her brain, which just... During the procedure, Mr. Milchick says to Helly that he's very excited to meet her, which shows us that Mr. Milchick is not severed.
I'm very excited to meet you.
There's very cool cinematography here as Helly starts to doze off following the procedure, and then we see her wake up. But this time, it's not the worker version of Helly we see, it's the outside version of Helly waking up in the stairwell. And this goes back to the first episode after Helly walks out into the stairwell for the first time. She asks Milchick if there's something wrong or if she's trying to leave, which Milchick lies to her and encourages her to just walk right back in.
Your orientation's been so much fun.
Oh no, I'm trying to leave.
No. You want to spin around and head back in? That should be that.
We see a sequence of her running out and walking back in. We even see her absolutely just lunging herself into the stairwell.
No, she's... Ooh. No, I'm gonna call you back.
Which gives us more closure and understanding about what happened in that stairwell sequence in the previous episode. Just, that's so cool. Show don't tell, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Milchick says something subtle but really important in this interaction with Helly in the stairwell.
When we heard you were coming here, it was like a miracle. It's amazing what you're doing.
It's so quick, it's so subtle, but it's a really significant moment in the script. Helly is someone that Milchick views as very important.
Hey, old timer. One day down.
Okay, really quick. So this right here, this is Mr. Milchick greeting Helly after her first day of work. You know, this is the Audi Helly he's giving these flowers to. If we go back to the last episode when Mark almost hit Helly with his car, she's holding those flowers on the outside. Just a fun little detail. Just a fun little detail. Like the continuity, it continuities. Because Mark is now the department chief, he is set to be the first to arrive in office every single day. We see Mark looking over a checklist of things he's supposed to do, his morning duties, if you will. And we see him using a variety of Lumen branded products, which is very interesting to me. At Lumen, on the severed floor, there is no outside world. Everything is Lumen, which is indicative of how wealthy and involved this company is, and potentially a little bit culty. As part of his morning routine, we see Mark dusting off these Bibles, essentially. There's a 3-volume compliance book and a combined version as well. We also see Mark picking up the group photos off of his desk, which is a photo of the old group before Helly arrived, featuring Petey. While Mark is looking at this photo, you can tell he's experiencing some complex emotions and doesn't really know what to do with it, so he ends up hiding these photos in the storage closet. Helly comes up to Mark, asking about how it's tomorrow now, and we get a little more insight into what it's like to be a severed worker.
Hey,
So it's tomorrow now?
it's Monday.
A weekend just happened.
Yeah.
Mark explains that even though they don't really get to experience sleep or a weekend, they can still feel the effects of that.
You may feel rejuvenated or happy, less tense in the shoulders, spry.
It goes to show that a severed worker really never leaves. They hop in the elevator, and the next thing they know, the elevator's opening back up and they're back at work, even if a whole weekend has passed. We see that Dylan's desk is completely covered in all of these incentives that he's won over the years he's been working there.
The erasers, the finger traps that you see displayed here, caricature portrait. I've accrued an embarrassment of wealth in that regard.
One of these incentives being the waffle party, which the best refiner of the quarter gets to enjoy the waffle party experience.
And that shit gets you a waffle party.
It's also here that Mark's glass cube on his desk is pointed out one more time.
What about Mark's crystal head cube?
That's not a prize, that's just something they gave him.
It's gonna come up again in like the last episode, so just remember that. Yeah, you get it. We see a little bit more into Irving's personality when he calls out Mark for taking down the group photos with Petey in them.
I just noticed you removed the group photos from the desk.
Apparently this is really against the rules, and Irving is being a little bit passive-aggressive about it, which is so funny.
Yeah, we're gonna take the new ones at Helly's party today.
Oh.
We're seeing more and more how much of a stickler and a hard ass Irving is.
I do think the old photos are supposed to stay on the desk until the new ones come in.
Mark is teaching Helly how to do the work they're doing, which is really odd. Basically, on their computer screen, they're looking at a page full of numbers. And what they do for their job is feel out which numbers don't belong and they put them in a bin, which is where the name comes from, macro data refinement. That's what their job is. Mark explains to Helly that the way you find out which numbers need to be refined by saying that the numbers make you feel something. They invoke fear in you. And I'm just going to tell you now, this is one of the mysteries that is still unsolved at the end of season 1. We don't know actually what they're doing, what they're refining, how the refinement works, how the numbers make them feel scared. We don't know any of this. Helly is still completely unsatisfied and wants to get herself out of this freaking job. This is when we learn that a severed worker can in fact submit a resignation request, but the resignation requests are always denied. Mark further explains to her that quitting the job would essentially end her life because she wouldn't exist anymore.
And quitting would effectively end your life. I mean, in so much as you've come to know it.
It's better to exist, even though your existence is slightly miserable, than to never have a chance at life at all. And this idea comes up again in this episode in the next scene. Mr. Milchick enters the room, creepy as ever.
Hi, Mr. Milchick.
Helly, I'm agog at how well I can tell you're already fitting in.
I think what it is he's just the embodiment of evil kindness. Ooh, yeah. They're playing a little get to know you game where they pass around a red ball. Again, interesting, another deliberate use of the color red. What's really fun is that this get to know you game devolves into seeking truth and knowledge, which is so cool. The way that the game works is when the ball is passed to you, you say a fact about yourself, which is really awkward because these people don't know anything about themselves. Irving first turns to the 9 core principles principles of the company.
Something about me is that I know all 9 core Lumen principles.
Showing us a little glimpse into just how far gone Irving is and how dedicated he is to his indoctrination.
What's your favorite?
All 9.
When the ball is passed to Helly, she gets really upset because, again, she doesn't know anything about herself.
I don't know if home is a house or an apartment or if I live with a family.
I like to think my Audi lives on like a riverboat.
It's here that we first learn the term outie.
I'm sorry, Audis are...
They're us on the outside.
Yes, like a belly button, outie. The official terminology is innie and outie. Innie is a term referring to the work self of the severed worker who just stays on the severed floor all the time, or the outie is
On the outside.
during this game, Helly is refusing to comply. She's still shaking things up, refusing to just settle and accept her existence.
You saw yours yesterday in the video.
Right, I actually have a few things to say to her. Can I record something back?
She's asking really good questions, essentially about how she can escape this prison. And this is where we learn something that's just crazy.
So what if I write her a note?
Unfortunately, the elevators are equipped with something called code detectors.
Lumen has supposedly invented a technology to detect code or any kind of writing inside of the elevators and the stairwells.
They're like metal detectors for written symbols. A Lumen original, apparently.
And this, okay, I know there's a lot going on here with the sci-fi dystopian vibe, but the code detectors in the elevators, it's the one thing that I can't... I just can't get by it. The physics, the math, the science that would have to be involved in order to make this actually work is insane. And I don't think it's possible, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for the purpose of how great this show is. Just know the one thing my little science brain has a gripe about with this show is the code detectors. We'll talk more about it in a sec. We end the awkward moment with Helly by passing the ball to Mark. He opens up and explains something about himself, is that he broke protocol this morning by hiding those photos in the storage closet. Looking at the pictures of Petey made him feel sad. And the way that he's explaining it makes it seem like this is the first time he's ever felt that.
I was dusting the old group photos, the ones with Petey, and it just made me feel sad.
Like, legitimately, feeling sad was new to him. Mr. Milchick's reaction to this is really telling.
It is puzzling you have an outburst like this for Petey and not for, say, Carol D.
He refers to this event of Mark hiding the photos as an outburst.
Puzzling you have an outburst like this.
Mark experienced an emotion and did a very human, normal thing to do and was told that he was having an emotional outburst and this was an inappropriate way to behave. For something so simple as moving a photo away from its designated location. It's just an inkling into the amount of extreme control these people are experiencing.
But we knew Carol D was leaving beforehand. I mean, Petey was just gone.
Mr. Milchick ends this whole conversation by telling them they should be grateful that they have a life at all, alluding to what Mark said earlier about how if they leave, if they quit, they die. And we see from Milchick pushing onto these people the idea that their existence is a gift, and even if they're miserable, they should just shut up and be grateful, because if they weren't here, they wouldn't be alive.
Things like deaths happen outside of here. A life at Lumen is protected from such things.
So culty. Cults will use this kind of language to manipulate people, and often telling people that they need to focus more on gratitude is a way to keep them entrenched in a situation that is not healthy for them. Like, whoever wrote this show knew what they were doing. The group is seen taking a photo together to replace the old photo on their desks, and Helly is clearly extremely uncomfortable.
Say gratitude.
Gratitude.
She dips out of the photo session, grabs a sticky note, and writes, "I quit" on the note, and heads to the elevator.
Helly?
As soon as Helly hops in the elevator with that note, red lights start flashing, an alarm starts blaring, and we see a security guard coming from another end of the building. This is Mr. Grainer, and this is our first introduction to him. Mark tried to follow Helly, but got locked out of the area where the elevator is as soon as the code detector went off. Luckily, he's able to convince Mr. Grainer to let him in to talk.
Perhaps you better come with me.
Mr. Grainer. Hey.
Mark lies to Mr. Grainer, telling him he's training Helly and neglected to tell her about the code detectors on the elevator. Because of this, instead of Helly getting punished, Mark gets taken away to somewhere called the break room. The break room is in a locked area, which consists of a long, dark, creepy hallway with another creepy door at the end of it. Miss Cobell opens the second door, inviting Mark into a dreary room. And that is all we see of the break room for now. We then cut to Mark on the outside on a date with Devon's midwife, a woman named Alexa, and Devon set them up on a date together. An interesting fact we learned from this conversation is that Mark is under the impression that his job at Lumen is the work of a corporate historian.
So, a lot of sensitive material, hence the...
Also through this date, we see Mark getting absolutely shit-faced, just having so much alcohol. After the date, they're out walking on the street and Mark sees a group of protesters. And here's where we get a little more insight into the political goings-on of the outside world in regards to Severance. This group, the Whole Mind Collective, is protesting against the procedure. Lumen is apparently lobbying to have required severance across the board. Mark gets really upset with these protesters, and it's interesting to see how he's grappling with the idea of being severed.
Okay, well, what about the self-mutilating types that do it willingly?
He has convinced himself that what he's doing is a good thing and it's the right thing for him, and people protesting against that don't understand him and think that he is a bad, immoral person.
Forced labor.
Yeah.
Forced labor.
Really?
Okay, so people can just like self-imprison.
He's very defensive about this because, again, he's convinced himself that what he's doing is good. To compensate for feeling so defensive about this, Mark kind of freaks out on these protesters, and it's really not a good look for him.
Are you 12 years old? Are you even in high school yet? Okay, come on.
Mark is having to grapple with people throwing questions at him and forcing him to think critically about his decisions. If we look at this as a parallel to religion or being in a cult, this is also a very normal response for people being told that what they're doing is not good. Mrs. Selvig, or Miss Cobell, basically invites herself into Mark's house that night.
Peace offering.
Are we fighting?
I just keep thinking about those damn bins.
To hang out with him, I guess.
That is so not necessary, but very kind. Thank you.
Not only does she invite herself into his place, she kind of hits on him, which is interesting.
My late husband was a carpenter. He said he would start building us a house in the hereafter. And there would be a small guest apartment in the back in case I found a new man before I got there.
This is the beginning of a really weird dynamic we start to see where it appears that Cobell has this weird obsession with Mark, almost as if she has a crush on him. Honestly, I'm still not really sure what that's about, but it's creepy, to say the least. She points out to him that one of his light bulbs has gone out. After she leaves, Mark is compelled to go downstairs to get another light bulb. There we see him open a box labeled Gemma's Crafts. He pulls out a candle colored green and red. Another very interesting use of the color red. The next morning, Mark calls in sick to work. Mark tells Mr. Milchick when he calls in that he's dealing with a very minor stomach issue. Maybe it's curiosity or concern that drives him to do this, but Mark goes to the address that Petey provided on the back of his note in episode 1. Following the address, Mark finds himself at an abandoned greenhouse. He finds Petey there, and Petey explains that even he doesn't know what they actually do down there for their work. As an employee, he was trying to map out the floor and figure out what they were doing there. We see scribbled on a part of the greenhouse that Petey has been trying to recreate the map again outside of the office.
I had the original for you when I left.
We also get our first glimpse into something called reintegration sickness, which Petey is dealing with right now.
Sorry, reintegration sickness.
Petey then tells Mark about the break room.
What is it that happens down there that's so bad?
There's this room. We go in there when we don't act right.
And plays a recording for him.
I'm afraid you're not sorry. Please. I truly am. I'm sorry. Please read the statement again.
Now, it is never explained how Petey got a hold of this recording, but the voice on the recording sounds like Mark talking with Mr. Milchick. Basically, what it sounds like is Mark reading out loud a really creepy scripture or prayer, followed by Mr. Milchick saying,
I'm afraid you don't mean it. Again.
As he then starts to say the phrase again.
Forgive me for the harm I have caused
As Petey's showing this to Mark, he looks absolutely stunned by this discovery. And after this scene, we jump right back into the office. This cut right here is another thing that's really cool with the cinematography. Like I said before, how the severed floor is really bright and beautiful and sort of liminal. The outer world is consistently displayed as creepy and dark. This bit of imagery is another thing that's really reflective of what cults do. When you're in a cult, the outside world is the scariest thing you'll ever face. You don't want to become part of the world. You're different from them. You're better than them. When you're on the inside, you're surrounded by light and peace and goodness contained within these walls. I think it's so cool how that concept is portrayed so well with just the cinematography of the show. Back to the severed floor. We learn a couple things about Irving in this episode that are really interesting. First, we see that Irving has something that looks like dirt underneath his fingernails. We also learn that Irving has been previously disciplined for dozing or falling asleep at the job.
Wow, a lot of confidence for a man who once got disciplined for dozing.
Sleeping as a severed worker is super against the rules, and we see that portrayed when Irving does in fact fall asleep later in the episode. As he is dozing, he starts hallucinating what looks like black tar or some kind of oil seeping around his desk. You see that it's such a big deal that Irving fell asleep because Mr. Milchick is there immediately.
Irving.
This time, rather than punish him by sending him to the break room, they decide to give him a wellness session to make sure he's okay. While Irving is sitting in the wellness center waiting for his wellness session to happen, he's looking at a painting. The placement of this painting is so good. Like, it's one of those things that on the first watch through, you're gonna miss it. It's just in the background and they focus on it so briefly. This painting on the wall is actually a form of foreshadowing, and it's done so well. And just for your information, for fun, we learn in the last episode that the people on the right side of this painting, the four beings, are called the Tempers. And that's all I'm going to tell you for now. As Irving is admiring this painting, we meet a new character named Bert. Bert is from a different department called Optics and Design, and it's very clear that Irving and Bert have never seen each other before.
Are you a department head?
Well, optics and design. A two-person department, so barely.
So there are other departments that do different jobs, but they're separated and they don't interact with each other. Bert's job has something to do with putting up the paintings and moving them around every couple of months or so. And Irving and Bert bond over talking about the paintings and their love of the company.
It's rare to meet a sophisticate.
Both showing signs that they're pretty equally dedicated and indoctrinated into this company. Irving gets called over by a very calming voice, and we see someone who's named Miss Casey. Miss Casey and Irving have a very strange but oddly relaxing wellness session.
All right, Irving.
Miss Casey reads off a list of facts about Irving's Audi.
Your Audi is strong and helps someone lift a heavy object. Your Audi likes the sound of radar.
The rules are you can't enjoy one more than the other.
Try to enjoy each equally.
And this rule just adds to the odd feel of this wellness session.
I'm sorry. That's 10 points off. You have 90 points remaining.
Points?
Please don't speak.
We also see that there's a camera in the decor on the table in the wellness center. At this point, we don't know where that's broadcasting to. With Mark being out of the office for that day, Helly is being trained by Dylan.
What even are these numbers? Like, do we even know what we're supposedly cleaning?
My theory? The sea.
And she does find success. Helly is able to experience her first scary number. The way that this is portrayed in the cinematography and the music is really amazing. You can feel the tension. You see what she's experiencing. It's just really cool. I like it. I like it, okay?
All right, Helly. Hip, hip.
They were scary. The numbers were scary.
The episode ends with Mark on the outside bringing Petey back to his house so that he doesn't have to sleep in a cold greenhouse. We see a little bit more of Petey's reintegration sickness. It appears that his symptoms are in fact getting worse. We also see that Petey has a little burner flip phone and we hear that phone ringing. episode 3, we open up seeing more of what's going on with Petey, a little more insight into the reintegration sickness and what's happening inside of his brain. We see his perspective constantly shifting between his work self and his home self.
Petey? You okay?
There's a little banter that goes on about this robe, okay? See this robe that Petey's wearing? Mark has never worn this robe. He got it from Rickon. He doesn't like the robe. Petey gets the robe. Notice the colors on the robe and how they're red and blue, but they're striped. Like before when we saw Mark wearing the red and blue where it was like split on like top and bottom, like red shirt, blue pants. This is red and blue stripes intermixed with each other because he's reintegrated. He's been unsevered. Costume designers, artistic directors, I see you. Petey's memories have their relativity all messed up to the point where his first day at Lumen goes as far back as his 5th birthday. So it's harder to gather his memories from Lumen because they're spread so much further across his life. Petey tells Mark about a place on the severed floor where people don't get to leave. And this is just the beginning of uncovering a larger mystery within the story.
Look, I found a department, one they don't tell us about, one where you don't get to leave.
Petey also mentions to Mark that Mark's severed self still feels the pain of losing Gemma, even though he doesn't know what it is. That underneath everything, Petey could still tell that there was a deep hurt there.
You would come in sometimes with red eyes. We had a joke that you had an elevator allergy, but I always wondered.
Mark gets Petey settled in his basement to sleep for the night while Mark goes upstairs to continue his regular nighttime routine of popping open a beer and watching some TV. Miss Cobell is watching him from her window, which is so creepy, but also shows that she's worried about him and his mental health.
Are you all right?
As Mark is watching TV, we are introduced to a character named Natalie, who's portrayed on the TV. This woman is the spokesperson for the board of Lumen. We see her having a political debate with someone on a news channel.
What we do at Lumen, nor any severance procedure.
I understand you don't want to answer my question.
No, I'm answering your question.
In the morning, as Mark's leaving his apartment, we see Miss Cobell dressed as Mrs. Selvig on her front porch.
Oh! Hi!
Hey.
She's using a hairdryer on her front porch to supposedly melt the ice. Oh, she's so cute. The character she plays as Mrs. Selvig is such a kooky grandma lady. I love it so much. One of the reasons I love her so much.
I'm sorry for the racket. I'm just de-icing my stoop.
Oh, I'm just de-icing my stoop.
Oh, thanks again for the cookies.
I'll bring by more.
On the severed floor, Mark is in charge of giving the morning announcements.
Okay, quiet down all. I'm Mark, your new announcements person.
And here we see Mr. Milchick taking photos of the group as Mark's giving his announcements. This is something we see pop up throughout the episodes. And like everything else in this show, Mr. Milchick taking these pictures ends up being something that's really significant later in the show. We learned that Helly had submitted her resignation request to the company. That morning as she was talking to Mark, she was a bit excited about it, a little smug.
You may as well skip it, actually. I put in my resignation request.
You did submit it.
I did.
During the morning announcements, we learned that Helly had a very quick turnaround on her resignation request.
Do I have to finish out the day or can I skip out now?
And it was denied.
Yeah, no, that can't be right. My Audi wouldn't do that.
Helly is devastated about this. We take a break from the office to stop back in on Mark's house. We see Rickon and Devin parked outside about to drop off a package, which it's so cute. They're so cute.
Oh, this is so fun. Shall I, tiptoe up and sneak to the door?
I love this man. I love him.
Against the door or to the side?
I think either's really good.
I'm going to put it off to the side.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Good.
I mean, it's perfect.
After Rickon and Devin leave, Miss Cobell then goes to Mark's front door and steals the package. She then uses a gold Lumen key to enter Mark's house. She wanders downstairs where Petey is. First, it might seem that Cobell entering Mark's basement for seemingly no reason is just some way for the writers to create artificial tension and make you feel worried for Petey, but that's actually not the case. Miss Cobell has a very specific reason for going going into Mark's basement. Because she's so worried about Mark, she's trying to find some kind of memorabilia that will help him. She finds the candle we saw earlier contained in Gemma's crafts, and she steals it. There's a really cool sequence where Cobell is pacing in the basement and Petey's watching her, and we see Petey shift between his Audi and Innie perspective. Very well edited, super cool. Luckily, Petey was able to sneak out of the basement unseen by Miss Cobell, and Petey escapes the house and just starts wandering around. Back at the office, we see Mark knocking on the bathroom door to try and get Helly to come out. She's been in there for 45 minutes, scrawling a message onto her arms.
Get ready, do the things you need to do, because I'm coming in.
No.
Okay, here I come.
Mark,
I'm sorry.
no, I'm not decent.
I'm sorry.
Mark walks in and catches her writing a note that doesn't look like letters, but it does when you put your arms together. It's here we learn that the code detectors pick up lettering written on the body as well. Code detectors, dude. It's just...
Well, unfortunately, the detectors can pick up lettering anywhere.
How? How do they do that? Please explain to me. How? What if someone has a tattoo with letters on it? Are they not allowed to be a severed worker? It's fine. We're not gonna think about that for like a few more minutes.
You want Grainer to use the bad soap?
There's bad soap. Thanks, boss.
When Mark comes out of the bathroom with Helly, Irving was listening in on their conversation. This is so cute.
I am troubled by you having high-stress exchanges like that so fresh off your food poisoning.
Irving recommends that they go to the perpetuity wing.
If it's a deeper meaning she craves, she should see the perpetuity wing.
Mark goes to Miss Cobell to request permission to go to the perpetuity wing that day, and we get to see more of Miss Cobell's psycho come out.
And have you filled out a common space reservation slip?
No.
Mark.
She like throws a mug at him to teach him a lesson. This is so weird.
Why are you gonna make me throw my mug at you?
Why would you?
She's insane and I love her.
What I just did was something I knew that you could handle and grow from.
Back with the other employees, we see something that's really significant about Dylan and his character.
My delts are embarrassingly good today. My Audi does muscle shows for sure.
If your Audi did muscle shows, you wouldn't have to work here.
We get moments like this throughout the episodes where Dylan is talking about his Audi and wondering about what his life is like on the outside. He seems to care about that really more than anyone else, and he's always seen speculating about who he is. While Dylan and Irving are having their little banter, Helly is cracking another plan to sneak out a note. She writes a note down, puts it inside of a pen cap, covers the pen cap with tape, and then goes to swallow it like a pill. She's caught right at the last minute by Mark, who informs her that the code detectors can detect writing inside the body as well. Please, no.
The code detectors can read messages hidden inside the body as well.
Again, how? I could maybe get on board with finding some kind of lettering on skin. I could see that a code detector could pick up lettering on the body, but inside the body? Like inside the body? Like, do you know an X-ray would not be able to do that. An MRI would not be able to do that. An ultrasound would not be able to do that. Like, all the technology we have that can look inside of someone's body. Lumen is a very technologically advanced company to come up with an elevator and a stairwell that can see code inside your body. That's the one thing that takes me out of it, you know? But again, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief to further the plot. It's okay. I'm gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay. And also, yeah, apparently if you swallow a note, you have to get a colonoscopy.
When he asks how long ago you ingested it, I really can't recommend honesty enough. It's easier for you both if he knows which end to start from.
We see Natalie, the girl from the TV the night before, in Miss Cobell's office that morning. Natalie is on the phone with the board. The phone call with the board is really weird and awkward, and they want Miss Cobell to talk first. It's just strange. It's odd.
The board would like you to speak first.
Oh, yes, of course.
Miss Cobell tries to explain that Petey, the employee who's currently missing, was showing signs of reintegration, or having the severance undone, if you will.
The board is conveying pretty strongly that the severance procedure is provenly irreversible.
The board does not believe her, and then they hang up on her. So that's fun.
And for what it's worth,
The board has concluded the call.
Yes, okay.
Mark and the gang are on their way to the perpetuity wing. We see Irving rambling on about some scriptural nonsense while Dylan pulls out Egan Bingo, which is a little game he likes to play for the perpetuity wing, which is supposedly really boring. On the way, they run into optics and design. Bert and Irving have a little moment where they connect again, and clearly there's some kind of fondness and friendship developing between them.
Bert? Hi. I trust that your session was good. Great.
Dylan, upon seeing optics and design, absolutely freaks out. He's not okay with optics and design.
And I'm just wondering what you're up to. It's rare seeing you out of your hole.
This is where we hear the first of a rumor about the history between macro data refinement and optics and design. Dylan has heard the story that optics and design at one point came into macro data refinement and attacked them, killing all of them. And that's why the departments are now separated so far where they don't interact and they don't know each other or where each other is located. Dylan clearly believes this because his reaction to seeing optics and design was really strong. But the point of this is there's a rumor or some folklore in the office about a violent coup that once happened.
We're here.
The perpetuity wing. Dude, the perpetuity wing is nuts. It's nuts. Like, if you were unsure if this was a cult,
Come now, children of my industry, and know the children of my blood.
Whoa. We get a long look at a statue recreation of the current CEO of the company named James Egan. There's a really long extended shot on his face showing us that this is an important character, and in a way, this is the introduction to this character. So remember that. Remember this face, because that's what they're telling you to do, is remember his face, okay? Now this little exhibit in the perpetuity wing is full of these statues of past CEOs through the decades of this company. It's like a wax history museum with voiceovers explaining the story of each CEO. Keir Egan was the very first CEO. Throughout the show, we will repeatedly hear reference to Keir.
I confer upon you the freedom to serve Keir in the advanced role of Macrodata Refinement Department Chief.
And this is who they're talking about, is this original CEO of the company. Ooh. Creepy. During this perpetuity wing experience, there is a voiceover happening of a Keir saying, guy from Keir,
consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you.
You know, probably they like push a button and it's like,
Keir, my children.
During the perpetuity wing experience, we're hearing this voiceover of Keir, okay? Essentially, he's talking about being on his deathbed and looking back over his life. As Keir is talking about being near death, Petey is being shown on the screen.
I know that death is near upon me.
Just a little bit of that artistic foreshadowing, very ominous, very cool.
People have begun to ask what I see as my life's great achievement.
Also in this speech, Keir starts talking about this story of how he tamed the tempers of his mind.
I have identified 4 components, which I call tempers. I walked into the cave of my own mind, and there I tamed them.
He talks about the 4 tempers.
Woe, frolic, dread, malice.
Now, if we go back to the freaking painting, do you remember the painting that I told you about? Those are the tempers. That's what the tempers are. Just a fun little tidbit. Among the statue wax figures in the perpetuity wing, Irving explains to Helly that he was shapeless when he woke up on that table. Going to the perpetuity wing and learning about the Egans and reading their compliance handbook scripture has shaped him into the person he was meant to be. His love for this company is at a delusional level.
It's okay if you cry.
In the back of the perpetuity wing, there is a perfect replica of Keir Egan's original home.
Jesus.
No.
here.
It's got the feel of a historic museum. This hits close to home for me because cults do this shit. At least the cult that I was in did this shit. At one point in my life, regrettably, I worked at an exhibit like this, and I revered this exhibit. It was such a special, sacred place to me. Now, looking back on my life after leaving a cult, seeing this portrayed in Severance, oh, it's just a little too close to home. Like, dude. Irving is very clearly the most believing, most dedicated cult member of this group. He's demanding reverence in the perpetuity wing.
Mark,
Yeah?
were you about to bed sit?
He finds them playing the Egan bingo game. He starts to lecture them about behaving inappropriately in such a sacred place. During the conversation where Irving is getting all mad at them, Helly takes the opportunity to sneak on out of there. She's gone. We cut to Helly running frantically through the hallways as she finds the emergency stairwell. As Helly's running, we cut to Mr. Milchick sitting in the conference room reading the book that Miss Cobell stole from Mark's doorstep. Cobell asked Milchick to read through it just to check to see if there's any hidden messages or notes. We see Helly trying to open the stairwell door, which is now locked. Helly grabs the fire extinguisher from the end of the hallway and runs up to the window of the door and starts slamming the fire extinguisher to break the glass on the door. Once there's a hole created, an alarm goes off. Milchick sees the alarm and frantically runs out of the conference room, leaving Rickon's book behind. She reaches her arm as far through the glass as she can, holding out a note on her Egan bingo card reading, "Never come back here." As soon as Mark realized Helly was gone, he was running after her. He catches up to her before Mr. Milchick gets there and pulls her away from the door. Mark gives her an exasperated look here of just complete disapproval. They're trying everything they can to help her feel happy and comfortable, but she's just so defiant. She's asking questions. She's disturbing the peace. And in this environment, she's looked at as a delinquent who must be punished and reformed. I cannot tell you the amount of people I've talked to who have left religions like this because they asked questions, and especially in cults. When you ask the hard questions, you're the one who gets punished. It's just one of those other things religions do to manipulate you and cause you to conform, make you feel like you are crazy if you have valid questions. Critical thinking is so fucking important. Okay, back to the story. Well, Helly gets sent to the break room, and we finally get to see what happens in the break room. She essentially sits down and is attached to a lie detector of sorts. And we also see that the break room session is being recorded. She's asked to read out loud a statement called the compunction statement, which is lit up right in front of her. The statement reads as follows: "Forgive me for the harm I have caused this world. None may atone for my actions but me, and only in me shall their stain live on. I am thankful to have been caught, my fall cut short by those with wizened hands.
All I can be is sorry, and that is all I am."
Her punishment is to sit and read this phrase repeatedly until the lie detector test comes back that she's being truthful.
I'm afraid you don't mean it. Again.
Really? Now we know what goes on inside the freaking break room. It's just heavy, man. It's just creepy. And we gotta end this episode with the strongest ending so far. We see Mark at the end of the day doing his job of switching out the group photo from the old one with Petey to the new one with Helly. The last one he opens up was Petey's old picture and frame. When he opens it up, he sees the map that Petey had been creating. Brilliant, right? So cool. We were told in the previous episode that Petey had been making a map. We also know that the severed any version of Mark has no idea that Petey was doing anything. Such a moment of triumph for us to see him catch up to what we know. So good. Important things I want to point out on this map, two things that are significant. One, the section here where it says some people might live here, referring back to when Petey mentioned that there are people who never leave the severed floor.
One where you don't get to leave. I mean, you really don't get to leave, as in they're down there right now.
And the section up here that reads mind. I got nothing. I have no idea what that is. Mark heads home to find that Petey is missing, so he immediately goes out to look for him. He sees some emergency lights and goes to a gas station where he does see Petey come out of the gas station escorted by some EMTs. Mark gets out of his car within view of Petey and they meet eyes. Petey looks Mark in the eyes and then collapses dead. Mark goes home and frantically goes through his basement, covering up any evidence that Petey was there. As he's heading back up the stairs, he hears Petey's phone ringing. And that's the end of the episode. And it just gets better. It just gets better. You just wait. Episode 4 is when things really start to pick up. There's a lot going on here. So, you know, this episode opens up with Helly still in the break room at 5:15 p.m. when her shift ends. They escort her to the elevator to allow her to have a break for the night. And there's a lot of anticipation here because the day before, Helly literally shoved her arm through a window to get a note out there saying, never come back here. This begs the question, did her outie see the note? Is her outie gonna come back? She comes right back. She's right back at work in the morning, freshened up, looking ready to go. Helly is escorted directly back to the break room where she continues her session. The day before, Helly read the compunction statement 259 times in a row. She is told to keep reading it. As Helly's reading in the break room, she starts hearing the voice of a man behind her.
What the hell is that voice?
She later describes as a grumpy, mumbly guy. Helly returns to the regular office after her session in the break room, looking absolutely worn out, completely frazzled.
How many times?
1072.
She then asks Dylan about the voice she heard behind the door.
What about the voice behind the door?
Crying baby, you mean?
No, like the angry, mumbly guy.
And Mark, overhearing this, quickly shuts the conversation down, saying they are not supposed to talk about what happens in the break room. This is another really interesting mystery in the show that they have yet to explain to us. It's my theory that there's something happening in the break room that messes with their severance chip just enough to allow them to tap into the deepest levels of their subconscious. Whatever their subconscious is being allowed to tap into is something that will cause them to comply. Most likely something that's a great source of motivation to them, or potentially something they are afraid of. That theory will make a little more sense when we get to the end, but if you have ideas or theories about what the sound behind the door is for the severed workers in the break room, let me know in the comments. We ended the last episode with Mark hearing Petey's phone ringing. In the beginning of this episode, we see Mark tucking that phone away into a box, probably with the intention to forget about it. We then see Mark's innie in the office sitting in the bathroom studying the map that Petey left for him. Also that morning, Bert from O&D stops by to pay a visit to Macro Data Refinement. While Dylan is very skeptical, Bert explains that the day before he had heard Irving talk about how excited he was about the new handbook totes coming out.
You mentioned the anticipation could distract, so I figured, heck, bring them over now. That way it won't be on your mind.
Bert then invites everyone at Macro Data Refinement to have a tour of the O&D department if they would like. Irving immediately takes Bert up on his offer and goes with him to O&D. Wait, how the heck did Bert get there? Dylan was wondering that too.
How the wet fuck do you know where this office is?
Apparently Bert had a previous colleague who had to make a trip to the MDR department before, Macro Data Refinement department. So Bert has written instructions on how to get to the office. Bert gives a copy of the directions to Irving, and those are going to come up in a little bit. And I bring it up because when that comes up, I refer to it as a map. It's not a map, it's written directions. So I just want to clarify that. We get even more insight into how strange and culty this place is as we see O&D and the work they do there. We hear Bert and Irving talking about various majestic sounding handbook passages and paintings that represent the passages. After they've been talking for a while, Bert actually pulls a move on Irving by reaching out and touching his hand. The friendliness between these two men is developing into something more than a platonic relationship. Irving, in a really cute way, sort of panics about Bert's romantic gesture and promptly heads back to Macro Data Refinement.
I'm sorry, wait. What time is it? I have to go.
On his way back to the halls, he passes the conference room where Milchick was sitting the day before, the same conference room where he left Rickon's book behind. Helly has been suspicious of Mark's behavior and ends up going through his desk and finding the map that he's been studying. When Mark walks into the room, she calls him out about the map, asking what it's about. She then shows the map to Dylan, and all three of them start having a conversation about mapping in the office. It's against the handbook rules for them to map the office, which Helly immediately finds weird.
It's an Egan rule, render not my creation in miniature.
Why?
Again, another rule that everyone's blindly following without understanding why. Helly gets upset with Mark, calling him a hypocrite for trying to force her to follow the rules when he's not even following them himself. We see a little bit of Mark's defensiveness and his indoctrination kick in as he starts to downplay what the map is and says that it's not important, it's just a bunch of scribbles and doodles. Helly then calls him out for being more loyal to the company than he was to his friend who mysteriously vanished.
I'm loyal to how it felt around here before you showed up.
Mark then proves Helly right by putting the map inside of a shredder. Part of me thinks that Mark didn't even do this consciously, that his fear kicked in and he panicked to, one, get rid of evidence, but also to try and prove a point to Helly that things are more peaceful and better here when you just comply and follow the rules. They're interrupted by Irving, who calls all of them over to go to the conference room to look at Rickon's book.
I was going to get Mr. Milchick, but I thought it best not to break the chain of command.
Rickon's book? Read. We see them all staring at the book in confusion as we learn that another rule of this company is you cannot read any books except the handbook.
Has anyone seen anything like this before?
Which again is a very culty rule.
And dally not in the scholastic pursuits of lesser men.
No books except the handbook, I know.
If you are wondering if you might be in a cult, if you have rules restricting the kind of literature you're allowed to read, pretty telling that you might just be in a cult. Upon opening this book, we see that there is a written dedication directly to Mark, which confuses everyone in the office, but makes Mark feel really intrigued. Mark says he's going to go turn the book into Mr. Milchick, but he does end up actually just hiding it in his desk. Mark isn't completely lost. I think Mark is just terrified of getting caught and punished. But the damage with Helly has already been done. I think that Mark shredding that map was the last straw for Helly, because following this, we see her reach an extreme breaking point. Helly finds a large paper cutter with a huge blade on it and goes to Miss Cobell's office, threatening to cut off her fingers with that blade. This is a really cool moment where we get to see just how strong of a protagonist Helly is. She goes to Miss Cobell, demanding to film a resignation message directly to her Audi.
Do I look like I'm fucking around right now?
No, you do not.
She is granted a very rare, unique permission to actually record this video.
Hey.
We see her leaving the day early, hopping on the elevator with a disc in her hands, proudly saying goodbye to everybody, and especially rubbing it in Mark's face.
Well, boss, guess this is the part where I should tell you to go to hell. Except you're already here.
We immediately see her waking back up in the elevator holding another disc in her hand. Everyone sits down to watch the recording, which is a response from Helly's Audi. And it's confirmed here that Helly's Audi is not concerned about her innie experiencing suffering. Helly's Audi views the innie as a commodity or a convenience, telling her that she's not a real person.
I am a person. You are not.
Helly's Audi is an asshole, and the innie Helly is absolutely broken by this. The tension of this moment is broken by cutting to the outside world where we see Mark talking on the phone with his sister Devon. They're talking about finding a birthing cabin for Devon to deliver her baby in. After this, we see Mark scrolling through his phone looking at the news. He finds an article confirming that Petey has died. Mark then hears Petey's phone ringing from the basement. At the office the next day, we see Mr. Grainer talking with Miss Cobell about Petey's death. Cobell is still convinced that Petey was reintegrated, but the only way to actually confirm this is for them to get a hold of Petey's severance chip. Petey's body is scheduled to be cremated following his funeral, so getting a hold of Petey's chip is something extremely time-sensitive. Cobell is being culty again.
Benevolence, nimbleness, property.
Super culty. We jump to Petey's funeral, which is presumably that weekend. Mark decided to go to the funeral to pay respects to Petey and runs into Miss Cobell there.
Oh, poor man.
Well, on the upside, at least now we both have a date.
She explains to Mark in her persona of Mrs. Selvig that she knew Petey because he would come down to her shop and buy her hibiscus wraps. Mark very smoothly explains to her that he's there because he saw on the news that this man worked at Lumen and he figured he might have known him. Smooth, Mark. Smooth. At the funeral, we're introduced to Petey's daughter, June, and his ex-wife. Petey mentioned June to Mark at the beginning of the previous episode, so Mark knows about June and who she is, but he can't indicate that, because technically, he's not supposed to know Petey at all. Mark meets Petey's ex-wife, explaining that he works at Lumen, which clearly strikes a negative chord with Petey's ex-wife.
So you didn't even know him at all?
We then see June go up to Mark and start talking to him. She as well is clearly upset by the idea of Severance and says something to Mark that to me implies that Petey joined Lumen for the same reasons that Mark did.
Do you ever think that maybe the best way to deal with a fucked up situation in your life isn't to just shut your brain off half the time?
With these context clues, we can gather that Petey probably started working at Lumen because of his divorce from his ex-wife. He didn't want to deal with the trauma and stress of that situation, so he decided to take a severed job. During the funeral, we see Miss Cobell sneak into the viewing area where Petey's coffin is. Conveniently for her, this room is in the very back and is covered with a curtain. We see Miss Cobell take out a drill, and, she drills to remove Petey's severance chip. This woman is insane. This woman is psychotic. Mark, who is participating in the funeral, sitting among the guests, begins to have flashbacks of Petey's death. The way that the PTSD is portrayed is also done super well. It's really clear the feelings that Mark is experiencing and what he's going through, but this is portrayed with no words at all. Because of these flashbacks, Mark leaves the funeral early, bumping into Miss Cobell on his way out. Her timing was absolutely impeccable.
Sweetheart, are you all right? I'm so sorry. I think I have this.
I cannot believe she was able to so easily fish a chip out of a dead man's brain in such a short amount of time, but props to you, Cobell. And this is where we get another beautiful moment, a really cool scene, probably one of my favorite scenes from the entire show. And what prompts this whole scene, I think, was June talking to Mark at the funeral. I mean, she basically slapped him in the face with her words. I think hearing that message from her, it finally hit him that having his severed job is not actually helping him overcome the death of his wife and the grief that comes along with that. We see him after the funeral giving an awkward goodbye to Miss Cobell. He walks up to his door and then pauses. Instead of going inside, he decides to hop in his car and go on a drive. He pulls up on an area of the road where there's some caution tape. We see Mark step over a divider and walk up to a tree. He observes the area, looks at the tree, touches it, and starts to break down in tears. This is where Gemma got in a car accident. We don't know if Mark has been to this location before, but this is the first time we get to see Mark actually processing what he's feeling. Just the emotion and the music and the setting are telling so much of a story without any words. This event is never mentioned with words in the entire season. This is a moment special to Mark that is just for us to observe. This was a significant moment for Mark. Things start to change for him, and we're going to see that moving forward. We then jump to the next workday on the severed floor. First, we see Miss Cobell requesting Miss Casey to run a special wellness session with Mark. Like I said previously, Miss Cobell is clearly very concerned for his well-being. Irving and Bert meet up and start flirting with each other.
Here invites you to drink of his water.
Irving accompanies Bert on his walk through the halls, putting up paintings, and they spend the day talking about their fanatic beliefs. We see Mark sneaking out his contraband book, The UUR, from Rickon. We see him start to read it in secret. The scenes with this book, gold. Comedy gold. The writing in the book is so funny. It's so funny. It's like when you're 14 years old and you read a really cliche, deep Tumblr phrase for the first time, or like those really deep memes you can find trying to teach you some kind of lesson. This book Rickon wrote is entirely comprised of phrases and sayings like that.
Bullies are nothing but bull and lies.
It's like a 14-year-old's fever dream, and it's amazing.
They cannot crucify you if your hand is in a fist.
I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. Mark gets called to his wellness session with Miss Casey, which is really interesting because the first thing we see is Miss Casey lighting up the red and green candle that Miss Cobell stole from Mark's basement, which shows us exactly why Miss Cobell was snooping around in his basement. She wanted to find something that could potentially send a subconscious comfort to his innie as he does a wellness session. Miss Casey gives him a ball of clay and he starts to mold a clay tree. And if you remember what he was doing the night before, he was crying by a tree. It appears that that really powerful healing moment for him by the tree where Gemma got in a car accident, that's like manifesting in his innie in some way, which is really cool. And at this point, we start flashing between perspectives pretty quickly. The way that this episode ends is so cool. Incredible. Like, incredible work. The pace is starting to pick up, the tension's starting to pick up, the story's starting to really come together. It's 12 out of 10, you know what I mean? It's so good. Because Mark is doing his wellness session and Irving is spending time with Bert, Helly and Dylan are the only people left at the office. Dylan is intently focused on his work as usual. Helly takes the opportunity to say goodbye to Dylan while he's distracted by his work and sneak out of the office holding a rope. After Helly leaves Dylan behind, we see him sneak into Mark's desk where he pulls out Rickon's book and begins to read it. We see Helly walking through the hallways back to the elevator while we flash between Mark's wellness session and Irving going back to O&D with Bert. As Irving is walking through the hallways leaving O&D, we see a slight smile creep across his face as he turns around to go back. When he does, he peeks through a door in O&D and sees that there's a giant room filled with workers. The O&D department is actually much larger than we were led to believe. And it's not a miscommunication, it was a blatant lie because we've been told multiple times O&D is only a department of 2 people. All of the scenes and all of the tension is building up to Helly, where she props herself up on the garbage can in the elevator. She opens up the top, ties the rope to the rafters.
How are you? Good. Yeah? Seems like you're getting the hang of stuff here.
And then cut to the outside of the elevator where we see just her torso and legs. And before the elevator door closes, Helly kicks the garbage can out from underneath her. And that's how the episode ends. In complete silence. Woof. You know. Wow. I alluded to something earlier about Mark shredding the map and that being the final breaking point for Helly. I think Mark gave her hope in some way that like someone would be on her side. Mark did show her that he prioritizes loyalty to the company and his own comfort and safety over doing the right thing. He just betrayed his supposed best friend, so what's to stop him from doing that to Helly? This drives Helly to threaten self-harm so that she can get herself out of this situation. She's a prisoner, she's being tortured, and she wants to escape. Honestly, quite admirable, the lengths that she's willing to go to help herself to get out of this situation. And she views her outie as herself. Helly trusts herself. That's why when she first heard her resignation request was denied, she was so shocked.
Yeah, no, that can't be right. My outie wouldn't do that.
There's no way that I would do this to somebody, right? I can imagine the thought process, well, she's me. And then finding out that you are an asshole. You're the worst. You're like the worst. There's no one in her corner. There's no one on her side. Not even herself. Helly's suicide attempt has many layers to it. Kind of, in a way, she has a death wish already. Consistently, she's trying to warn her outside self about what's going on, to not just get her out of the situation, but also to protect her outside self from something that she might not even know is happening. Ultimately, if Helly gets what she wants, if she gets out of the company, she's never going to exist again. She's going to be dead. The suicide attempt was, yes, an act of desperation, but also in a way an act of revenge. She did it in the elevator, as she was supposed to be waking up as her outside self. Like, dude. She turned on her outside self and wanted her to wake up and die. Like, if you're not gonna let me die, if you're not gonna let me escape this prison that you feel intent on keeping me in, then you're going to die too. Oh! Just the ultimate badassery. She's so complex. She's so cool. So the beginning of episode 5, oh my god. We see the elevator open up at the security desk in the Audi world as we view Helly through a security camera. We see Helly's legs struggling, trying to push up against the wall to save herself. For some reason, the security guard was on a break or something and just was not there to see her struggling in the elevator, so the elevator door closes and goes back down to the severed floor where we see Mark about to exit his shift. We also see Mr. Grainer frantically running through the hallways to get to the elevator. Mark opens the elevator door to find Helly suspended in the air. He immediately grabs her and props her up. Mr. Grainer comes in, removes the rope from her neck, and helps Mark move Helly to the floor. Helly breathes and coughs, showing that she is still alive. Helly opens her eyes, and from her perspective, we see Mark standing over her very concerned as Grainer pushes him into the elevator, telling him to leave. Mark is tearfully panicking in the elevator as we see him transition back to his Audi self. And oh my god, this fucking show! Like this moment. Wow. You know, just wow. Just wow. We see Mark walking into work the next day, totally nonchalant, unaware of what has been happening at his workplace. And when he hops in the elevator, the shift from the Audi to the innie in this, it's so good. I mean, god damn, this man's acting phenomenal. Outside the elevator, Mark is greeted by Miss Cobell and Mr. Milchick, who explain to Mark that Helly is okay. She has no permanent damage, just some severe bruising.
She's in the hospital.
Miss Cobell gets angry at Mark, telling him that this whole thing is his fault and it happened on his watch. But like, if I remember correctly, Miss Cobell, Mark was in a wellness session when this happened. Because you put him there. Don't you go doing that, babe. No.
This happened on your watch, Marcus.
Helly attempting suicide affected Mark on such a deep level. This is the beginning of Mark starting to wake up and look at the reality of his situation, to see that something is deeply wrong with this scenario that he's in. It really sucks that Helly had to go to that length to get Mark to see that something was wrong, but it is kind of cool to see how this has affected Mark and his perception of his reality. Mark's innie self is clearly beginning to have moments of change and self-discovery as we see him continuing to read Rickon's book.
What separates man from machine is that machines cannot think for themselves. Also, they are made of metal.
We see basically a whole work week passing while Mark is reading through the contraband book. Helly has been out for about 5 days. Miss Cobell was able to get Petey's chip diagnostics looked at and learns that he was in fact reintegrated, so she now has concrete proof of this happening. Now the goal for her is to figure out who did the reintegration on Petey's chip. Ooh, I don't know. As Mark is leaving work for the weekend, he checks his phone to see that he has a ton of missed calls from Rickon and Devin. We hear Mark listening to all of Rick's ridiculously hilarious, overly worried voice memos as he's driving to the birthing cabins to meet up with Devin and Rickon.
If this is Mark's work self, please tell him Rickon said to come quickly.
Devin is in labor, the baby's coming, and during this we get to see even more of Rickon's wacky beliefs put into play.
Mark, would you help me hang the kelp?
Hang the kelp? Why?
Do you really want me to explain it?
When Devin starts to have a contraction, Rickon says that they all need to share a secret.
Purging secrets can create a soul void that speeds the labor.
Okay, and we want that.
Oh, we do.
Rickon tells Mark that he's very disappointed that Mark hasn't called him to thank him for the book yet.
We left a copy of his new book on your doorstep.
5 days ago, 5 full days.
And Mark replies with confusion because he hasn't seen that book, at least not his Audi self, right?
I mean, it must have been stolen or something.
What? Oh my god! Oh my god. Oh.
A little bit later, while Rickon is asleep and Devin is having another contraction, Mark decides to tell a secret to Devin. But the only thing he can get out before Rickon wakes up is he thinks Lumen might be up to something.
What do you mean? Like with your paychecks?
You remember the businessman?
Mark has started to think a little more critically about his situation. Mark also runs into Alexa again. Things are really tense and awkward between them, but Devin later tells Mark she thinks that he should try again with Alexa and that she would probably be willing to go out with him again. There's a point during the night where Devin is a little flustered and overwhelmed and decides to go on a little walk to look for some coffee. Devin makes a trip to the cabin next door, which we've been told in the story is an extremely expensive cabin, so the people who are there must be very wealthy. Devin sees another pregnant woman inside, waves to her awkwardly through the window, and requests to come in for some coffee.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Chris.
This woman is clearly very uncomfortable with Devin being there, even after they start talking, but Devin is completely clueless.
Holy shit, by the way, about this cabin. So nice. You rich?
Devin and Rickon are very neurodivergent coded in this show, and I love them.
You rich?
They're just so cute and funny, and I love them. I love them. While Devin is obliviously chatting away with this very uncomfortable rich lady, Devin learns that her name is Gabby and that she's going to name her baby William.
I'm naming him William.
While Devin is going through the pushing process of labor, we see Mark sitting out on a dock by a really beautiful lake, while we're hearing Devin go through labor, allowing us to experience two things at the same time. We also see Mark depicted having more flashbacks. The PTSD is really affecting him. Again, with no words, we can see what Mark is thinking, and he's finally not okay with just being complacent anymore. Like, it's all kind of starting to hit him in this moment, and it's portrayed so beautifully. Back at the office on Monday, Helly is greeted at the elevator by Mark when she wakes up. Right now, it feels like Helly is extremely distrustful of Mark. He did shred Petey's map right in front of her, so how can she know that he's someone she can trust? Regaining trust with her is something he's clearly going to have to earn.
We should hide inspirational handbook quotes around the office for her to stumble upon.
While talking about Helly, Dylan uses some dark humor.
She just needs to start earning perks, dude. I'd end my life if I didn't have any finger traps yet.
And yes, it's hilarious, but there's some really interesting insight we get here. This line actually completes a picture for me of the people in the office.
I'd end my life if I didn't have any finger traps yet.
The severed workers don't all show it in the same way, but they're all distressed and traumatized. They're in a bad situation, but they've all individually found their own way to cope and make sense of their surroundings. Dylan has put all of his focus into finishing his projects, earning all the perks, getting way more than everybody else is what's keeping him going in this distressing environment.
She just needs to start earning perks, dude.
Irving just went the full indoctrination route and decided to dive himself into the writings of Keir, his obsession and love and devotion to the company becoming his coping mechanism.
Waking up on that table, I was shapeless.
Petey started focusing on mapping the hallways and figuring out what's around them and what they're doing for work to distract him. It's also possible that the mapping wasn't actually his coping mechanism, but a response to not having a way to cope, causing him to try and figure out everything that's going on around him, driving him mad and eventually leading to his death. Mark at first doesn't appear to have a coping mechanism, but it is absolutely written into the show. From episode 1, it's very clear that Mark and Petey were best friends.
You guys were one of my favorite office friendships.
It's my understanding that Mark used Petey as his way to cope.
That voice's name was Petey, and he became my best friend.
This is further backed up by the line in episode 1 when Petey's talking to Mark in the diner.
I'm your best friend. You're my very good friend.
Yeah, I think that that wasn't just a joke. I think that that was true. Yes, Petey and Mark were friends and they got along in the office, but Mark became almost codependent with Petey, relying on him to get through his days at the office. Helly is the first person to not just settle into the system and stay defiant. She's the first person we've seen who's standing up for herself. Through this storytelling, we can see the complexity and depth of all of these characters, adding to the list of many reasons I absolutely love this show. Miss Cobell tries something new by asking the wellness director, Miss Casey, to come join the others in the office that day to keep an eye on Helly. Miss Casey has been asked to spend the entire 8-hour workday with them to make sure that Helly is okay and doesn't try to harm herself. Irving starts to doze again as we see some more black ooze dripping from the ceiling. When he wakes up from his little nap, he decides he needs to go on a trip to O&D to visit Bert.
I have to go to O&D.
Mark asks Irving to make a copy of his map for the O&D workspace, just in case they need to go get him. Irving goes to the copy machine, and as he's copying the map, something else comes out of the printer. Mr. Milchick is immediately there by the printer to explain that this was a misprint sent to the wrong printer. It was intended to be a joke for Miss Cobell. We learn later that Mr. Milchick ran this photo through as a sort of protocol called a 266.
You ran a 266 on Irving B?
Yeah.
in order to try and discourage Irving from visiting O&D so much.
I thought it might dissuade him from spending so much time with Bert G.
We get a closer look at this photo as Irving is showing it to Dylan. The photo depicts two departments of severed workers, one being O&D with green badges, the other being macrodata refinement with blue badges. Depicted in the picture, the people from O&D are absolutely massacring the people from macrodata refinement. There might actually be some validity to the rumor Dylan has heard about optics and design running a violent coup, which is why their department was supposedly shrunk down to 2 people. While in the storage closet, Irving tells Dylan about how he saw more workers at O&D, which makes this whole scary picture even more scary because he's like, oh no, not only is there now proof that they're gonna eat me, but now there's like 6 of them, 7 of them, and there's 4 of us, so that's not good for my body potentially to not get eaten. Very interesting, very cult-like that they have this 266 protocol to essentially manipulate people with fear. Irving was visiting another department. Instead of making a rule that he can't go do that and potentially getting pushback and having people ask questions, start thinking critically, they just manipulate with fear. Oh, don't talk to those people. They're going to eat you. They're going to eat your guts because we don't want you communicating with other people and potentially us losing our control over you, so we're going to manipulate you with fear to keep you from getting new ideas. That's what this is. Kind of like the idea that some people perpetuate that like certain political parties participate in demonic sacrificial rituals and drink the blood of children because they're a certain political affiliation. It's like that kind of shit. Just such a culty thing to do, But also, yeah, I think a reason why they have them separated so far is to keep them from sharing information with each other. Because when you have more information to work with, it's easier to think critically. We don't want that in a cult. No critical thinking here. Miss Casey is extremely dedicated to her job of keeping an eye on Helly, watching over her like a hawk. Mark can tell that Helly just needs some space, so he makes a big gesture for her.
Please describe for me your time in the restroom.
Oh, no.
Mark spills his coffee all over Miss Casey's notebook, causing her to have to leave to go get another notebook, which will take 8 minutes round trip.
I can watch Helly R while you're gone. It's only a few minutes, right?
Distribution supplies 8 minutes, round trip.
As Miss Casey is walking through the hallways to get another notebook, she passes by Bert, who's sitting in the conference room nearby macrodata refinement. In her absence, Mark asks Helly to go out on a walk through the hallways, a sort of mental health walk, if you will.
Careful out there, boss. Weird energy about.
And we'll get back to Mark and Helly on their mental health walk in a second. Upon her return to the office, Miss Casey is informed that Mark and Helly went out on a walk, so she leaves to go find them. But before she leaves, she tells Irving that Bert is in the conference room.
What are you doing here?
I was looking for you. I hadn't heard from you.
Irving and Bert are very clearly excited to see each other, but Dylan is not so sure.
Well, Dylan, what are you doing?
Dylan takes off his belt, wrapping it around the door handles, locking Bert inside of the conference room. Dylan locking Bert in the conference room is a silly, funny, goofy moment, but it's also foreshadowing. Because of course it is.
I didn't know why you hadn't been back, and I didn't want to scare you again, like with the hand thing. You didn't scare me.
Dylan learns that Irving and Bert have feelings for each other, and he's skeptical about this, not because of them having feelings for each other and that being against the rules, but actually out of genuine concern for Irving. He genuinely thinks people from O&D are dangerous. Then, talking to Bert, we learn that the people from O&D are cautious of the people from macrodata refinement.
We don't trust you guys.
What do you mean?
They say you all have pouches.
Bert also explains here that the reason he told them there's only 2 people in his department is because of the fears and the rumors surrounding macrodata refinement.
According to some, you each have a larval offspring.
Dylan skeptically follows behind as Irving escorts Bert back to O&D and they have a nice conversation. Bert invites Dylan and Irving to come inside the workspace and look at the paintings and just hang out for a minute. While Bert and Irving are talking and sneakily trying to hold hands, Dylan finds a painting on the shelf at O&D. It's the same painting that showed up on the printer. Dylan gets really furious because they asked Bert about this painting earlier, but he denied its existence.
He claims claims he doesn't know about this painting. Meanwhile, it's sitting right there on his shelf.
But Irving looks a little bit closer at the picture, realizing that it's actually not the same. In this version of the photo, the badge colors are switched, so macro data refinement, or MDR, are the ones attacking the members of OND.
That's not O&D, Dylan. It's us.
It's called the macro data refinement calamity.
Collectively, they question why there are two versions of the same painting and why the company is lying to them. This prompts Bert to introduce Irving and Dylan to the rest of his department.
Everyone, I want to introduce you all to Irving and Dylan and their friends.
Rewinding a little bit in episode 5, we've got to talk about what's going on with Mark and Helly. Mark takes Helly to some dark hallways under construction and takes Helly behind a desk in a room where they can hide from the cameras. He pulls out a little paper and is trying to regain trust with Helly by telling her he wants to try and remake Petey's map. Helly is immediately skeptical of this and turns away from him, starting to walk further down into the dark hallways. They continue to just wander as Mark has a heart-to-heart with Helly, and they happen upon something really, really weird. They walk into this room to see a man there surrounded by baby goats and feeding some of them. The man starts yelling, telling them that the goats are not ready and they need more time.
You can't take them yet. They're not ready. It isn't time. Go!
This opens up a whole bunch of questions that we do not know the answers to. Things are getting weird. Weirder than they were. Notice how when Mark and Helly venture further off into areas that they're not supposed to, it gets like way more dark and scary and weird. Again, very similar to cults. The more that you actually educate yourself and look into things that you've been taught, start reading the things they told you not to read. Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like you find baby goats in the middle of a dark hallway and you're like, what the fuck? Did you, what was in that hallway? And you're not going to talk about it? You're just going to keep that a secret from me? Like your secret $250 billion investment fund that you've been hiding from your members because you've been using their donation money to make it. Meanwhile, you're trying to eradicate the homeless population in your city instead of helping them, like that. Or the fact that the entire narrative that you teach the people who believe in your church is a lie, like a provable lie. Once you venture far enough down the rabbit hole, it starts to look like a lot of creepy dark hallways with a room full of baby goats. Know what I mean? On their walk back from the room with the baby goats, Helly accepts Mark's gesture and decides that she's going to help him continue to map out the office.
I'm sorry that this is the best I can do right now.
If you give me the map, I'll clean it up.
Meanwhile, they bump into Miss Casey, who was out looking for them, extremely worried about them. They follow Miss Casey back to the office and zoom out to see Miss Cobell watching them through the security cameras. Mr. Grainer enters her office asking if she's aware of what's been going on with her employees. Miss Cobell responds with a Keir handbook passage.
The surest way to tame a prisoner is to let him believe he's free.
There's a Keir quote for everything.
Yeah, so episode 5? Definitely a turning point. Definitely some things are changing here.
Weird energy about.
Another thing I want to point out that we're going to see consistently through the show is the concept of a shelf break. Shelf break is common terminology in the ex-religious and ex-cult community. Essentially what it means is little things add up one by one that you don't understand or you don't want to think about, and you put them away on the shelf in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, well, I'll worry about that later. But everything else that I still believe about this thing is all good and real, except that I'm going to ignore it. Over time, things just kind of pile up on the shelf. And that shelf is comfortable. That shelf is happy. It's sitting there. It's like, look, this is all good. There's a couple things. They're on the shelf. It's fine. And then you get to a point where something is so heavy or so many things are on the shelf that it breaks and everything falls apart. And a lot of people will talk about the moment that their shelf broke, the moment that you realized everything was a sham, right? Helly came into this whole scenario from the beginning with her shelf already broken. She didn't have a shelf. She was already disillusioned with this idea of severance that they're peddling out as work-life balance. If moving forward in the storytelling, I might allude to, talk about, maybe reference reference somebody breaking, maybe possibly, I don't know. That's kind of what I'm referring to, is that shelf break moment, the breaking point that can happen in a lot of ways. So at the beginning of episode 6, we get a bit more of a glimpse into the life of Miss Cobell. And let me tell you, it's insane. It's not a good glimpse, it's a crazy glimpse. First, we see her bedroom, which her bed, first of all, seems like a hospital bed from the 1920s. And we see even more of this 1920s hospital aesthetic with the pots and the bowls right next to her bed on the nightstand. Not only that, there's little dolls, like homemade dolls of former Egan CEOs. Like, that's crazy. Speaking of dolls and creepy cult stuff, I've got something to show you, if you don't mind. This is President Benson. This was given to my mother. Got a little bit on the back I'll read to you. Merry Christmas, 1987. President Benson. Only one made on suede, so this is rare. This is a one-of-a-kind suede pillow, and it's in my hands right now. So...
We don't worship the prophet, though.
And then it gets crazier because she walks around the corner and we see that her house has like a whole fucking shrine in it, okay? And the shrine has pictures of her from various parts of her life showing that she has been a lifelong member. So this woman is very dedicated, okay? She a little bit crazy. Also on Cobell's shrine is like a jester mask, which is one of the Tempers. Another reference to the Tempers. Creepy. We see Mark going downstairs to grab Petey's phone. And Mark makes a very interesting decision here, where he, instead of waiting for the blocked caller to call again, Mark takes the battery out of the phone and throws it in the garbage. Awesome, Mark. Great. No, yeah, great. We then cut to Irving and Bert chilling in a room full of plants.
You found this?
I come here sometimes, just me.
Bert recommends that that room becomes their special secret place where they can be together. There's a lot of tension in the room, and Bert holds Irving's hand.
Is this okay?
They get to a point where they almost kiss, but Irving stops it.
I'm sorry.
Most likely out of, the rules, duty to the company, and whatnot. Instead of kissing, they put their heads together, and Bert asks Irving to just stay with him for a while. We jump to the outside world where we see Devin at a park holding her baby. At this park, she happens to see the lady Gabby, the one from the wealthy mansion birthing cabin in the previous episode. And weirdly, it looks like Gabby does not recognize Devin at all. Devin, being her incredible, wonderful, oblivious, awkward self, goes down to talk to Gabby.
Looks like we both made it through.
Oh, hello.
She points out that the baby looks like a William.
I'm naming him William.
To which Gabby responds,
His name's Bradley, actually.
Not William?
Then we meet Gabby's husband, a man named Angelo Arteta, who promptly whisks his wife and children away from Devin's presence.
We should go.
Bye.
Bye, you guys.
What in the fuckity fuck?
Back at the office, Mark is continuing to read Rickon's book, while Irving is trying to get the MDR and O&D departments to be a united group.
This could be the start of us uniting the departments, the way Kia always intended.
Dylan notices that Helly and Mark have started acting more friendly toward each other, and he's curious if they might have feelings for each other, and he brings this up multiple times.
Where's Kier?
Hey. You fraternizing too?
What? No.
You two enjoy sneaking off the other day?
Are you implying that baby goats is code for sex with Mark S?
Mm-hmm.
Both Mark and Helly deny that there's something going on between them.
No, they were actual goats. Why would we call it that?
Okay. Yeah, I believe you.
But the smiles on their faces are sort of showing otherwise.
That's ridiculous. I smile all the time.
Hey there. What are you all talking about?
Mark then learns that Miss Casey ended up getting sent to the break room because of the little stunt that he pulled, pouring coffee all over her notebook and then running away with Helly. Miss Cobell refers to Miss Casey as a part-time innie, which is a really interesting term.
Part-time innies may not be as socialized and sophisticated as yourself.
That's something we haven't heard before. We also see in this conversation that Mark is starting to be a little bit more defiant and stand up for himself more.
She shouldn't shouldn't be punished. I mean, I thought Helly needed a walk. I mean, I'm allowed to do that.
Miss Cobell shows Mark that she was watching him and Helly on the cameras. Mark has a really great response here, showing how much he actually cares for Helly and her situation and her mental well-being.
Sniffing around other departments while your department falls woefully below quota.
She almost died.
In these new moments of defiance we're seeing from Mark, he also asks Miss Cobell what they do for their work.
Okay, so what is my job?
Are you really asking me that?
Yeah, what is it we actually do here?
Miss Cobell gets scary, dude.
We serve here, you child!
She's terrifying, my guy. She's like nun scary here. You know what I mean? Like, she's scary. She completely removes all of their hallway privileges, so they are no longer allowed to walk in the halls, and Irving cannot go to O&D, otherwise it's against the rules.
So get your little ass back to your desk and stay there until you're told to move.
Mark walks back to the MDR workspace really upset. He sort of blows up at them, especially Irving, saying that their hallway privileges have been revoked.
So, no more interdepartmental visits!
Irving apologizes for his behavior.
Sorry, Mark. It's my fault.
And then we see a fucking shift in Mark that I didn't see coming personally. You can really see Mark start to shine through here.
Which way'd you say it was to O&D?
Helly's defiance has done something to this group, and especially done something to Mark. And this is where everything changes. We hear some awesome badass strut music in the background while all 4 coworkers walk through the halls to go to O&D. Ooh, the scene is so good. It's so badass. So much of what's happening in this scene is communicated just through glances. We see the group walking through the hall, Cobell glancing at her screen, calling out to Milchick, and then back to the group where we see everyone looking forward except for Helly, who looks over to Mark and then back forward. It's subtle, but it's a big deal because look at this woman's face, okay? She is feeling this. The way that they filmed this glance from Helly was very intentional. It says a lot. Helly looks like she is seeing him for the first time. And like, they all feel so fucking sexy right now, right? And Helly looking at Mark is like, okay, damn, this guy kind of hot, you know? Like, so much is communicated with that glance, and and they're walking down the hallways knowing full well that they're being watched. It's so badass. It's so cool. They go to O&D where Mark and Helly are introduced to the rest of the team there. And they are shook. They're fucking shook, man.
This is more people than I've ever seen.
Same.
The 2 teams start to communicate with each other, and it's pretty apparent that neither of them actually know what they're doing for their job.
It's called macro data refinement. What do you refine?
Is that a watering can?
Bert and Irving have a little moment where they're being sexually repressed and also a little culty at the same time.
We keep plugging along. It's important work, obviously.
Everything we do here is important.
Helly has a great line here.
It's important because it actually is or because you're saying it is.
Mark steps up and gives an incredible speech.
Why won't they tell us what we're doing here?
He's recommending they work together to try and figure out what they actually do at their job.
The Egan philosophy is illumination. Then why doesn't that include us?
This speech is awesome.
That was poetic as shit, man.
Interestingly, Bert takes really well to Mark's speech.
Mark is right.
He is.
He is.
And they definitely should be trying to work together. We see Dylan wander over to a bin with some weird cards in them as Mr. Milchick walks in with his menacing stare. Dylan very quickly grabs one of the cards, shoving it in his pocket before MDR leaves the O&D department behind, escorted by Mr. Milchick. Woof. That scene is no words exchanged. This man is so intimidating. Milchick escorts the MDR team to an open space where we see Miss Cobell standing there quite menacingly. The way they framed this shot is really cool. Miss Cobell standing in the middle, dressed in a solid navy blue color. It adds to the kind of creepy nun vibe that's going on with her this episode. The tension is really high in this moment, and it's broken when Miss Cobell begins to sing a creepy ass hymn.
Key, chosen one, key.
We zoom in on Miss Cobell's face. Behind her in the background, there's a coat hanger, but in this shot, it's blurred and looks like a cross. Now, the religious imagery and symbolism is starting to become more apparent. The cult vibes are no longer subtle. They are in your face. If you missed them before, you're not missing them right now, that's for sure.
Chosen one, key.
Because of Mark's defiance, he once again gets sent to the break room. On his way in, Miss Casey is exiting her visit to the break room. They meet in the middle of the dark hallway, and as they pass each other, Mark leans over and says he's sorry. And Miss Casey in this moment looks sickly. We immediately cut to Mark on another date with Alexa, the midwife. Apparently, she did give him a second chance. Mark has some pretty severe injuries on his hand.
Apparently, I jammed my hand at work replenishing a water cooler, or at least that's what they tell me.
Those jugs are very heavy.
This date actually appears to be going pretty well. Alexa asks Mark if he and Gemma ever wanted to have kids, which opens up a whole can of worms.
Did you ever think about having kids?
With Gemma?
Yes.
And we tried for a little while. Wasn't really working.
Alexa continues to ask questions about Gemma, and Mark continues to talk about her. Then he stops himself because he's worried that he's making Alexa uncomfortable. Alexa actually thinks it's really important for him to talk about her because she was a big part of his life.
Yeah, but we're on a date.
I haven't walked out on you yet.
She views his vulnerability as something that's very healthy. They are having a really healthy conversation, which transitions into them making a joke about Severance.
She's a part of you. You can't just separate yourself.
Oh, no, but you can with this exciting new procedure.
Later, we see them continuing their date when it should be about the time for both of them to go home, but they are both lingering and having a good time. Mark sees a poster on a nearby wall picturing June, Petey's daughter, and a band that she's supposedly performing in that night right now. Mark and Alexa decide to go watch this band perform. It's a poorly thrown together street performance.
Who's doing sound in this alleyway tonight? It's terrible.
But there's a lot of emotion going on here. We hear them performing a song about Lumen. A very negative song about Lumen, might I add.
Fuck you, Lumen! I hate you, Lumen!
And we see Mark start to join in on the song and shitting on Lumen, essentially.
Fuck you, Lumen! I hate you, Lumen!
After the performance, Mark goes up to June telling her she did a great job.
Well, that last song was great.
Right, what you know, right?
Your dad would have really liked it, I bet.
How the fuck would you even know that?
We then see Mark and Alexa talking alone, where Mark is explaining to her how he knows who June is. Alexa interrupts him with a kiss. So the date is going very well. Devin is in search of a lactation consultant because she's having trouble with breastfeeding. A lactation consultant shows up for Devin and oopsie, it's Mrs. Selvig. Yeah, it's Ms. Cobell. Apparently, after Mark learned that his sister was looking for a lactation consultant, he recommended his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig. It turns out she's, actually really good at this job? At this point, we don't know for sure, but I have a pretty strong hunch that Mrs. Selvig was a nurse for the majority of her life, which is potentially why her bedroom looks like a 1920s hospital. I don't know. We also see Devin Googling Angelo Arteta and his wife Gabby to try and figure out who these people are. Her interaction with them was just so strange she couldn't shake it. She learns that Angelo Arteta is a pretty big politician who is in favor of legalized severance. From here, we randomly cut to a kid sitting on the floor watching TV who we've never seen before. This kid is counting up from the number 700, not very well. He's skipping a few numbers.
743, 746,
We then zoom in on Dylan.
Dylan.
This is the innie Dylan waking up in his home, sitting in his closet with Mr. Milchick. Mr. Milchick is grilling him about the card he stole from O&D, but Dylan is much more preoccupied with his surroundings, trying to understand what is going on.
Did you smuggle it out? Is it here?
Holy shit, is this my house?
Dylan, listen.
He is in absolute awe and shock at seeing this tiny glimpse into his real life. Dylan answers Mr. Milchick's question while looking around and just soaking everything in. Then the little boy we saw counting earlier runs into the room and yells,
Daddy! Daddy!
What the fuck?
Mr. Milchick grabs the kid, telling him he was supposed to count to 1,000.
Is that my kid?
We see Milchick speak over a radio, telling someone to end it, as Dylan then reverts back into his Audi persona. Yeah. Wild. This throws a wrench in everything. Apparently, there's a way to activate the severed worker even when they're not on the severed floor. The fact that Severance is not actually fully spatially dictated and that they can literally control your mind at any time is so concerning. They could literally make like a sleeper army if they wanted to. The implications of this are insane. Spooky. We see Mr. Grainer show up at Cobell's house, telling her that he was able to figure out the person who deactivated Petey's severance chip. This is someone named Rigabi, and Grainer is on his way right now to hunt this person down.
Want to come with me and find out?
No, I do not.
They then have a really funny moment where they pause and he starts asking about her nursing outfit she's wearing, as if he is genuinely curious about her life.
So, you're like a nurse or something?
So what are you, like a nurse or something? Cobell and Grainer consistently have this like weird sexual tension between them that's kind of funny.
You were right, Harmony. We should celebrate.
Yes, Daddy.
So, you're like a nurse or something?
Part of me wonders if they have this occasional, like, steamy under-the-table relationship. We then cut to Mark's house, where he is in bed with Alexa, so the date went very, very well. Mark is tossing and turning, having flashbacks of Petey. He has a moment of clarity and goes out to the garbage can where he threw away Petey's phone earlier. He puts the battery back in the phone, and it immediately starts to ring. And this time, Mark answers.
Hello?
Who is this?
Friend of Petey's.
Is this Mark Scout?
Mark then starts asking questions, and it's really cool to see him actually start to take action. Almost like this mystery about his job is becoming his new purpose in life. It's giving him something to care about and to live for.
I want to understand.
Can you meet me now?
And the look on Mark's face says everything. We then see maintenance men on the severed floor installing a door that will close, locking the MDR team inside their office. Mark goes out on a late-night adventure with Mr. Grainer following not too far behind him. The location they're at is in fact the school where he used to work.
I used to teach at this school.
I know.
We see the woman who was calling Petey's phone, presumably Rigabi.
Who are you?
Come with me.
And the episode ends. Episode 7 begins with Mark talking to Rigabi as she escorts him through the college basement. She tells him she's the person who deactivated Petey's chip. Apparently, Petey would not have died if he had listened to Rigabi and followed her aftercare instructions following the procedure. Petey just ran away at the first sign of sickness, which unfortunately ultimately caused his death. Mark tells her that he does not want to be reintegrated, but she poses a really interesting argument to him.
But he only exists because of you. And for all intents and purposes, he is you.
She asks him what he thinks his innie might feel.
Maybe he dreams every day about clawing his way to the surface.
His innie is still him, and he is someone who wants to do the right thing.
I'm not a bad person.
I think you want to do what's right. Both of you.
Mr. Grainer shows up around the corner and he can only see Mark. Mark obviously does not recognize this man, but Mr. Grainer says he's a friend from work.
Do I know you?
We work together down there. You having a chat with someone, Mark?
Ragabi sneaks up behind Mr. Grainer and whacks him in the head with a baseball bat repeatedly. And they don't show us what his head looks like, but it's pretty bad because Mark is wanting to absolutely throw up.
I'm gonna throw up. I'm gonna throw up right now. Don't!
Your DNA's in that!
Mark is panicking, freaking out. He does not know what's going on, and Ragabi explains to him that Mr. Grainer is the security guard on the severed floor.
Security? Oh my gosh.
He is not their friend. I mean, it doesn't matter now because he's dead. Ragabi finds Mr. Grainer's black security card and hands it to Mark, telling him that he should take it to work and that his innie will know what to do with it.
Take it to work tomorrow, he'll know what to do.
Who'll know what to do?
You.
She then tells Mark to run home and throw away his clothes and she will be in touch. As Mark exits the building, he vomits and then we see a look of sheer panic on his face. The panic is also communicated through the cinematography as Mark is going back to his house. The shot following him inside his house really portrays the intensity that Mark is feeling in this moment. He takes off his clothes immediately and starts throwing them into a garbage bag, throwing that under the sink. He looks up to see Alexa standing there in front of him. And this is where things just get really awkward and difficult, and Mark does not handle this situation well. I mean, understandably, he's in shock right now. He just saw someone, you know, get whacked a lot. She tells him she's been awake for an hour and she saw his car coming back and is wondering where he went. Mark comes up with a bullshit excuse, explaining that spending the night with Alexa was a big deal for him and he's feeling a little bit overwhelmed.
Do you want me to go?
Maybe, maybe.
And the look on her face. Oh, she looks so disappointed and hurt, but also kind of makes sense why she needs to leave right now. Like, it makes sense. Early the next morning, we see Mark putting his clothes in his garbage bin. Mrs. Selvig calls out saying that it's weird he's putting out his garbage at that time.
Mark! You usually dispose of your waste in the early afternoon.
I think she follows his life a little too closely. Just a little too close for my comfort.
You usually dispose of your waste in the early afternoon.
And also she invites herself over again, so that's great.
Maybe we should talk later over a nice hot cup of lavender tea.
Yeah.
At the office, we see Mr. Milchick testing out the fancy new office doors. I think it works. Pretty sure it works. He goes to the bathroom and finds where Dylan hid the card that he stole from O&D. We then see Milchick go check in on Bert at O&D, hinting that today is his last day and Bert is going to be suddenly retiring.
You've been a great leader to this department, Bert G. Thank you. You deserve something special.
Milchick then goes to the elevator to greet Dylan upon his entering the office. And Dylan is still absolutely shook from the night before when he saw inside of his closet and saw his son.
What the hell was that?
Walk with me.
For Dylan, that was just a moment ago. He is still freshly living that memory. Milchick explains to Dylan that what happened last night was something called the overtime contingency protocol. They can wake the severed workers up outside of work only for emergency purposes. Milchick also indicates that he did not get permission from Miss Cobell to do this and wake up Dylan.
And I didn't consult Miss Cobell because she's been so stressed.
This is the second time we see Mr. Milchick overstep the boundaries of what he's allowed to do with his position of power at the company. The first time we saw this is when he ran the 266 protocol on Irving. Mr. Milchick has been acting a little sketchy lately, trying to overstep what he can do with his power. It's my personal belief that all of the major events following this are entirely Mr. Milchick's fault. Starting with the 266 protocol, Mr. Milchick has been starting shit that he really shouldn't be.
The boy, was that my son?
Not knowing is probably for the best.
Milchick tells Dylan that he's not allowed to tell anyone about the overtime contingency protocol and that needs to stay between them. This is where we begin to see a major shift in Dylan. This man is shook. He's stunned. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier, Dylan is really obsessed with understanding who his Audi is, probably more than anyone else in the office.
I like to think my Audi lives on like a riverboat. My Audi does muscle shows for sure. I like to imagine my Audi's love made with a MILF or two, which is obviously badass, but I do pity the husbands.
Now that he's been given a glimpse into what his life actually is, it has changed everything for him. This is the exact thing that would drive Dylan over the edge. We're gonna see more of that in a second. We see Mark getting ready at his locker as he subtly slips the black security card into his pocket. When he arrives on the severed floor, he's greeted by Mr. Milchick, who explains that the new protocol is for all of the MDR employees to be escorted to their office space.
These doors help us to ensure you all are tucked nicely in your workspaces. Have a seat.
After he's escorted to his desk and the doors close behind him, locking them all in this workspace, you can tell immediately the vibe of the office is off.
The renovations are very nice.
Dylan, you all right?
Fine.
Everyone is off today.
Hey, it's me. Don't know if you heard, but Grainer didn't come in. Everything's fine. Just wondering where you are.
Miss Cobell is currently at Devon's house helping her with her latching difficulties. Devon is actually getting along super well with Mrs. Selvig. They're telling stories, they're laughing with each other, they're having a great time and have clearly become quite chummy.
I saw her again at the park a few days later, and she 100% didn't remember me.
What a snoot.
Devon starts explaining to Cobell the weird interaction she had with the congressman and his wife and how they have some kind of involvement with Severance.
Mark's company, Lumen, they say that they only sever people for work. Like, what if you wanted a baby, but you didn't want to, I don't know.
She's been speculating on their odd behavior and thinks that Gabby was actually severed during the labor process.
I saw her again at the park a few days later, and she 100% didn't remember me.
What a snoot.
What in the fuckity fuck?
This leads Miss Cobell to ask Devon exactly why Mark chose the severed job.
Severed. Why do you think Mark did it?
Devon explains about Gemma and her passing and how hard it was for Mark. Cobell then asks Devon if Mark ever thinks that he sees Gemma, which is a very pointed and interesting question.
Does Mark ever think he sees her?
We cut back to the office where we see Dylan is absolutely pissy today.
I get that you're worried about Bert. I suppose he's being disciplined for our visit.
Suppose he is, thanks to you.
He's in a mood and he is not having it.
If only someone had told you that going there was a shitty fucking idea from the jump.
Helly got to 75% completion on her file, so Helly has won a 5-minute music dance experience for the team to enjoy.
By reaching 75% refinement on Sienna.
Actually 73%, but we're cutting corners right now.
Mr. Milchick, she's at 73%.
Desperate times call for desperate measures, you know. Helly chooses a record labeled Defiant Jazz as Mr. Milchick puts it on. As the music plays, Mr. Milchick clicks a button, turning on flashing red lights in the office. And this scene is unsettling as fuck to me. This scene is weird.
The maraca.
This music dance experience is just a manipulation tactic to try and help them feel comfortable and happy while being locked in a room. And the creepiest part about this to me is that it's working. Helly starts shaking a maraca and laughing and dancing while Mark is also laughing and enjoying himself. I want to re-emphasize how unsettling and creepy this is because cults do stuff like this as well to control you or keep you in. They do fun things occasionally to make you feel like you have a community and to help hide the bad things underneath all the fun, great things that they do, like a dance party. During the time Mark is dancing, he touches his pocket and realizes there's something in there and sees the black security card, quickly slipping it back into his pocket, continuing to dance. There's another look here from Helly to Mark because she got the googly eyes and she cannot hide it. Dylan is the only person completely unfazed by the music dance experience, and Mr. Milchick is trying to get him involved. He basically starts harassing Dylan like a psychopath, getting really uncomfortably close to him and dancing in his face. We see a visual of Dylan's thoughts, a record player playing the sound of his son saying "Daddy," with a brief flash of his son's face. This small snip of time is all the information he has about his life, and it has clearly broken him. Notice how the room turns dark red, like entirely red, before Dylan pounces onto Mr. Milchick. Just noticing that, Dylan gets up, charges toward Mr. Milchick, lands on top of him, and bites his arm. The music pauses. Mr. Milchick stands up. We see a red stain through his sweater where he says that Dylan broke the skin.
He needs a full tetanus toxoid panel.
He then threatens Dylan to take him to see Miss Cobell for his defiance, to which Dylan has an incredible comeback, the best reply.
I'm reporting this to Miss Cobell.
Yeah, you want to go see her together?
I wish I could be this cool. Such a good moment for Dylan. This is great.
The music dance experience is officially canceled.
Immediately after Mr. Milchick leaves the room, the tone has shifted.
What is wrong with you?
They can wake us up.
What?
He immediately tells them what happened.
After I went up the elevator, I woke up outside in my house with Milchick. I saw my son.
We cut to them all huddled in the storage closet while Dylan is explaining some deep emotional stuff he's going through.
Then Milchick pulled him off and it was over. And now I'm just supposed to have that in my head every day here. I never get to see him again.
His walls are down, and it is so weird to see him being serious for once. I mean, this man is constantly being goofy and cracking jokes and being so unserious. But seeing him in this vulnerable, broken state, oh, it's so good. It's so good. Character development. Oh, this episode is so good. Upon hearing about the overtime contingency protocol, Helly comes up with an idea.
This is good. We could use this. If they can wake us up on the outside, what's to stop us from doing it to ourselves?
They realize they're going to need some top security access in order to do this, which is when Mark gets to come in clutch.
The controls are surely somewhere we can't access.
Like the security office?
Boom! The key card comes out. I can't imagine how shocking that would be to them to see that Mark has this key card. Mark's Audi knows something and is trying to help them rather than just quitting and running away. He's helping them in the fight. Let's go! Mark says that Petey once showed him where the security office is and that he can probably find it. Dylan stays behind while Helly, Irving, and Mark go out to find the office. They use the security card to exit the doors, and Irving immediately books it to OND. He wants to make sure that Bert is okay.
Irving. I'm sorry, Mark.
Leaving Mark and Helly to do the dirty work. As Mark and Helly are walking to the security office, we see another glance when Helly looks down at Mark's hand. Girl, she whipped a little, you know, she a little whipped. They find the office and enter, seeing screens with the security feed, and they are taken aback. They see a dashboard with all the severed employees listed and their current severed status. They also see that Miss Cobell is coming down the elevator, so they need to hurry. Helly is glancing through the security protocol handbook and quickly rips out a page labeled Overtime Contingency Protocol. As Miss Cobell walks to her office, she's greeted by Natalie, who is currently on the phone with the board.
Doug Grainer is dead.
Cobell explains that the person who killed Mr. Grainer was most likely the same person who reintegrated Petey. Cobell requests an in-person meeting with the board at the gala this week, and the meeting is surprisingly accepted.
The board agrees.
Mark and Helly return to the MDR workspace and explain to Dylan what they found. They have a conversation that is just so very ex-cult.
So no one is in there? That's lax as fuck.
Or maybe it's enough that we think we're constantly being watched.
It's too bad nobody told you guys that everything here is bullshit.
When you're like Helly and you're the first person to like recognize the reality of your situation and you try and tell everyone else about it and they're all like, you're crazy, shut up. There's that moment when they like catch up to you and they're like, wait, what? And you're like, yeah, I know.
It's Too bad nobody told you guys that everything here is bullshit.
It's great writing. It's great writing. We cut to Irving, who's walking in on Bert's retirement party. He's seen pretty quickly by Mr. Milchick, who is there, but is allowed to stay.
Greetings, designers, and one refiner. We'll have to get those doors looked at.
Irving gets to watch Bert's goodbye video from his Audi, saying goodbye to all the other employees. And this is really interesting because the Audi version of Bert is almost like snarky about it. He clearly seems very bothered by the fact that he doesn't know his coworkers and he doesn't know what he does for work.
This is kind of strange, but a lot of things about this job are. You all know that better than me, I'm guessing.
It's almost like he's making a slight dig at the company before he leaves.
I don't really know any of you. No recollection of actually ever meeting you. No idea even how many of you there are. Anyway, I just want to say thank you all.
Following the goodbye video, Irving looks absolutely devastated and asks a very loud, defiant question, beginning to feel bothered by the ethics of this company.
You're all just gonna stand here and let him die?
What sucks even more about this for Irving is like Bert's retirement was a punishment. Like deliberately, it was an unplanned early retirement. And essentially, yeah, because of the MDR team's defiance, they are more or less killing Bert. And this is the shit that breaks Irving.
Bert's Audi is retiring. It'll happen to you too someday.
You smug motherfucker.
This tight-ass man lashes out at Mr. Milchick, and it's amazing to watch.
You walk out of here with your memories. No one can rip them away from you like you never existed. That's enough!
Though Mr. Milchick is really upset with Irving, Bert convinces him to allow Irving to at least stay for the rest of the goodbye party. He's still clearly pissed though, and it's horrifying. Everyone lines up to give a goodbye handshake to Bert. Irving and Bert get a quick goodbye moment together before Irving is escorted by Mr. Milchick back to the MDR workspace. He has a look of absolute defeat and sorrow on his face during the walk. However, when he returns to the workspace and after Mr. Milchick leaves and locks them all in, they intentionally don't show us Irving's face. Instead, the camera pans over all of the other workers, showing us their reaction to Irving's face, which is so cool. Such a cool directing decision. Finally, the camera pans to Irving and there is something in his eyes. A weird sense of calmness and anger. And he gives us this line.
Let's burn this place to the ground.
They all just look at each other. No words necessary. End scene. I'm going to take a moment here to talk about Irving in particular, because Irving is the most compelling character to me in this entire season. This man went from full-on cult indoctrination to wanting to burn this place to the fucking ground. His character development is so fucking cool. More on that in the next episode. After work, Mark is seen in his home, scrolling through his phone looking for articles about Gans College, checking to see if there's anything in the news about Mr. Grainer being ended there. Alexa comes back to the house because she left her phone at Mark's place. And Mark is drunk as shit, man. He is plastered. He's acting surprisingly happy and friendly with Alexa. He invites her to stay over and hang out with him, which she promptly rejects. Mark, in his drunken state, seems to think that her being upset is because he talked about his wife Gemma the night before. Mark tells Alexa to wait while he goes over and finds a picture of Gemma, which we don't get to see. So frustrating. They're so mean to us. Mark holds up the photo of Gemma and rips it up in front of Alexa, which is really heartbreaking to watch. Alexa is clearly disturbed by this and again rejects Mark and decides to leave. Mark, for some reason, is shocked by her reaction, running after her, yelling,
Alexa, you know, we'll talk all about Gemma.
She was great. She was...
Bye, Mark.
He has a moment where he pauses and thinks back to what he was just saying.
She was great.
He continues to say more things about her. This is a really tender moment where you see Mark go back into the house and slowly pick up all the pieces of the photo that he ripped.
My wife was
allergic to nutmeg.
We hear a voiceover of him saying all of the things that he loves about Gemma as he's taping the photo back together.
And when she sneezed, she always sneezed twice.
He then says something very interesting.
I loved all these things about her equally.
Do you remember where we saw that before?
Try to enjoy each equally.
Yeah. Yeah. So this episode is insane. I love how they deliberately do not show us who Gemma is until like the very last second. Even as he's taping up the photo, we see his thumb covering her face because they're just mean. They just want to be mean to us. Finally, when he suddenly removes his finger, we see that Gemma is Miss Casey. Now we have to revisit all the coincidences that have happened with Mark and Gemma together. The candle in the wellness session, remember that? Remember when he made the tree in his wellness session as well? That moment when she's coming out of the break room and he's walking into the break room and they pass each other and it's like ominous and he's like, I'm sorry, you know, like that's a moment they had together. It's crazy looking back on that, being like, oh my gosh, she's Gemma. And then when Miss Gobel is like, does Mark ever think he sees her? Remember? Amazing. It's amazing. Oh, this episode's nuts. And we still got 2 more to go, baby. Things are about to get even crazier, baby. At the beginning of episode 8, we get more insight into the life of Irving as we follow his Audi through his evening routine. Irving is sitting outside with his dog as the sun sets, reading a book. We hear him call his dog Radar, which takes us all the way back to the 2nd episode during Irving's wellness session.
Your Audi likes the sound of radar.
Enjoying the sound of radar means he enjoys hearing his dog, who we see is his only companion. Irving appears to live a serene and simple life. Irving goes inside of his house and makes himself a cup of coffee, which is odd behavior for evening. Rather than getting ready for bed and going to sleep, Irving drinks his coffee and sets up a wooden board at his painting easel. Irving has already finished many paintings of the same exact image. A dark hallway lined with white lights similar to the hallway to the break room. However, instead of a metal door at the end of this hallway, we see a closed elevator door with a red down arrow above it. Irving turns on some rock music, squirts out some black paint, and begins to paint another version of this same exact painting. Okay, pause really quick. We're gonna pause for a little second here. This is one of the most important scenes of this entire season, in my opinion. At least as far as the storytelling and the unveiling of mystery goes. If we think back through the season, we've seen Irving falling asleep a couple of times, and when he falls asleep, he sees this black ooze dripping around him. He also saw what looks like dirt underneath his fingernails, which is now clearly black paint. What we know so far is that Irving has been falling asleep consistently at the office to the point where he's been disciplined for this. Like, he's getting in trouble. There are multiple times that he references that he's just old and tired and that's why he's so sleepy.
I can't help that I was hired older than you. Just means you're a party guy, Disco King.
But now we know that his outside persona has been brewing coffee and drinking it, staying up all night long, painting the same black painting over and over and over. We also know that dozing on the job is extremely prohibited.
Who cares? The handbook cares. No workplace shall be repurposed for slumber.
Because of what we see from Irving on the outside, I don't think that this rule about sleeping at work is for productivity. I personally have a theory that if someone falls asleep while in a severed state, it messes with the severance procedure and how it works. Irving's Audi knows something sinister about the severed floor and intentionally took a severed job in order to try and infiltrate. I think that he is drinking coffee and depriving himself of sleep while constantly painting the same picture over and over to try and lock that black painting inside of his subconscious. So when Irving's any persona falls asleep on the job, it messes with his severance chip, causing him to have glimpses into his subconscious, potentially viewing the image that his Audi has been trying to send to him. So Irving, while at first seeming to be a really unimportant side character, turns out he's probably one of the most important people in the office right now. I don't know. We're gonna have to wait to find out. This is just me speculating here after watching this show. By the time you're watching this, probably 8 times. Probably 8 times. The Ace of Spades song playing in the background is pretty cool as well, because it implies like a winning hand, and it's with Irving, and it just, to me, is showing that Irving is like their Ace of Spades, if you will. Just cool. It's just cool stuff. Also, really interesting, Irving on the inside is obsessed with the paintings. It's one of the reasons he and Bert got along so well is because of the paintings, and he's like loves the paintings, and then we go on the outside and he's a painter. That's cool. I'm really excited to see season 2 and if we get more answers on who Irving is and what the heck he's been up to. You know what I mean? But we'll see. We'll see. The next day at work, we get to see everyone waking up inside the elevator, which is really fun. We haven't gotten to see that before. And immediately we are thrown into a tense situation. In order for the MDR team to meet their quota for that quarter, Helly needs to finish her file.
How's she doing?
Gonna be down to the wire.
Miss Cobell, while talking about Mr. Grainer, confirms for us that this cult is in fact a deity-type cult.
Mr. Grainer sits with Kier now.
We've repeatedly heard the reference of Kier, serving Kier, all about Kier, the main prophet, Kier. But now hearing her say Grainer sits with Kier now shows us even further that they view Kier as not just a prophet, but as some kind of deity. Just a tiny glimpse into the beliefs of this cult. Helly finishes her freaking file. What?
Yes.
I knew you could do it, Helly R.
Oh, what the fuck? What's that? Yeah, this little animation is wild.
You have brought glory to this company and to me, Kier Egan.
It's an animation of Kier reading off a weird scripture.
Even in your darkest moments, I could see you arriving here.
Saying I love you to Helly and then flying off into the sunset.
I love you, but now I must away, for there are others who need me around the world.
I have other sheep which are not of this fold. It's like Jesus. That's so funny, this frickin' show, man.
So it's on now.
After Helly finishes her file and quota has been met for this quarter, we see Mark sitting with Miss Cobell in her office. This is actually a really funny moment seeing them giggle together. Mark, the character, does a really good job of acting here in front of Miss Cobell as if everything is business as usual, even though there is a sinister plan underlying everything.
Well, we made it, despite a staffing shakeup.
Yes. Mark recommends that Dylan is the one to receive the waffle party, which Cobell is a little bit shocked by since Dylan apparently always gets the waffle party.
You know, you can choose yourself or anyone but Dylan.
But Mark insists that it's more Dylan's thing and that he really earned it, which, yeah. Miss Cobell tells Mark that he gets to have an additional special wellness session with Miss Casey because this quarter has been so stressful and all the department heads get it. But in reality, she clearly has some weird ulterior motives. Mark is waiting in the wellness center where we see a creepy scriptural quote on the wall, and he gets called in by Miss Casey, who we now know is Gemma.
Mark?
Miss Casey.
Also notice the colors in this final wellness session. Mark is wearing blue, Gemma's wearing red. Upon walking into the office, Mark notices that things there are drastically different and a lot of her stuff is put into boxes. He asks her about this and she explains that she has been let go from the company.
So I'll be retiring at the conclusion of this session.
When did they tell you?
Just now. Just a moment ago.
Mark feels responsible for this and is a little bit distressed. As Miss Casey starts to do the wellness session, Mark keeps interrupting her to try and talk about what's going on.
This special augmented wellness session.
I didn't think you'd get fired.
He offers to talk to somebody to make sure she doesn't lose her job, and she just pauses. She leans close to Mark and whispers,
I really liked being in the office with you all that day.
Her life has been 107 hours long, mostly comprised of 30-minute wellness sessions. The 8 hours she spent with the MDR team was her longest stint alive, essentially, and it was her favorite time in the entirety of her existence. They have the sweetest, most tender conversation.
I suppose it's what you could call my good old days.
Miss Cobell has been watching and listening in on this conversation through the hidden camera. Cobell has such an interesting look on her face here, and honestly, I'm not really sure what she's trying to do or what she wants. Part of me thinks from the context clues we've been given, Miss Cobell really cares about Mark and wants him to be happy. She knows that the loss of his wife is making him feel devastated on the outside, and because she cares about him so much, seeing him so sad is hurting her as well. Her wanting Mark to interact with Miss Casey or Gemma is her own way of trying to help heal him from the inside out. This is probably why she stole Gemma's candle from her craft bin in the basement, and then had Gemma use that candle during Mark's first wellness session. Milchick points out to Miss Cobell that Mark and Gemma don't recognize each other.
You know it's good, right? That they don't remember each other. It means the chips work.
Cobell doesn't seem so sure about this, and instead of replying to his comment, grumpily says, "Take her back down to the testing floor, please." And this is where one of the longer-running hinted mysteries in this show is a little bit resolved for us. Not all the way resolved, but a little bit resolved. Enough to satisfy me, at least, for now. Following the wellness session, Milchick escorts Gemma to the previously mentioned testing floor, and we see a dark hallway lit up similar to the break room.
Do you know if I'm happy up there?
Gemma is clearly worried about dying, essentially, when she walks into that elevator. She tries to ask questions to Mr. Milchick, talk to him to try and get some kind of comfort, but Mr. Milchick's facade is completely gone now.
I just have so much to do today. On you go.
As Gemma steps into the elevator and the doors close, we see a red light light up above the door with a down arrow. I told you, the arrows are important. Also, arrow to the testing floor. Red. Let's talk about this now for a second, because what is this, right? The whole concept of the testing floor has been hinted at us from the episode when Petey mentions that there's somewhere on the severed floor where people never leave.
Look, I found a department, one they don't tell us about, one where you don't get to leave.
We then see on his map the circled location with houses there and question marks. The mysteries then continued through Irving, who sees the black paint dripping as he falls asleep at work. And then finally, when we find out that Miss Casey is actually Gemma, Mark's wife, who's supposed to be dead, and Gemma, who has been referred to before as a part-time innie, is then taken back to the testing floor. What's going on? We don't know. We don't know yet. Just speculating about how Gemma even ended up there when Mark was under the impression that she was dead. I have some thoughts of how this could have happened based on something that Rickon said a couple episodes ago. There's a point when Rickon and Mark are at the birthing cabin when Devin goes off to talk to Gabby.
I know the last time you were in a medical facility was for Gemma.
Oh, is that what this is? Medical facility?
Rickon saying this to Mark implies that there was in fact a point where Mark was with Gemma in the hospital before she died. Additionally, we have been given very little information about what Lumen is and what they do. In the first episode at the non-dinner conversation, they're talking about how Lumen makes everything.
Do you design the medicines?
I thought Lumen was more on the tech side of things.
What don't they make?
They started out selling topical salves and then expanded into medicines and further expanded into technology. Apparently, their medicines and technologies are really incredible. Based on this, it's entirely plausible that Lumen maybe owned the hospital or potentially has a lot of influence at hospitals. They were probably able to somehow fake Gemma's death in the hospital and then kidnap her as someone to use on their testing floor, whatever the testing floor is. I don't know, just a thought. Interesting mystery going on here, and I'm eating it up. Yum yum. Okay, back to the story.
Is everyone sure they want to do this?
Any macro jacks ready to party?
Yeah.
The team is presented with a pre-waffle party egg bar that everyone gets to enjoy. Dylan is given a special gift that he was able to custom request.
A very special gift for a very special Dylan.
Milchick encourages Dylan to show everyone what his gift is, and Dylan's a little bashful about it, but reluctantly agrees and shows everybody what he got. We aren't shown what it is at this point, but everybody seems to be pretty excited about what he got. As the workers are enjoying their egg bar, we see Mr. Milchick once again taking pictures of everybody. As Miss Cobell enters the office that day, she sees Natalie sitting on her desk looking angry. Natalie immediately lifts up her hand holding pictures of Helly in the elevator when she tried to kill herself. Natalie explains to Miss Cobell that she and the board now know that this happened 3 weeks ago, and Miss Cobell neglected to tell them about it.
How could you not tell us? Did Milchick give you those?
The board also somehow knows that Miss Cobell has been spending time at Devon's house as her lactation consultant.
It has been decided that you be suspended from your position effective immediately. You are fired.
Bet you didn't see that coming, huh? Yeah, I didn't see that coming, dude. Miss Cobell is obviously upset and asks if the board is even there. And this is the first time we hear a response from the board.
Is the board even there?
Yes.
Cobell calms down, she sits down at her desk and tries to reason with the board and have a conversation.
I can explain everything to the board tonight, please.
The board has concluded the call.
Oh, it's cold. It's cold, man. That is not the way you want to get fired, dude.
The board has concluded the call.
Later, we see Mr. Milchick escorting Miss Cobell to the stairwell, and it's pretty clear at this point that he is, in fact, the reason she got fired.
On you go then.
The creepy, power-hungry little munchkin that he is. Back at the egg bar party, we get a really cool moment with Irving. Irving is standing by the compliance handbook Bibles with the photo of Keir above them. We see him pull out one of the books and open it up to a scriptural passage. He reads the verse aloud, which is basically saying that working for Keir is the highest purpose you can have.
No higher purpose may be found than this, nor any higher love.
Another quick mention back to Irving's initial wellness session, there was one fact that he reacted to more than the others and lost points for.
Your Audi is skilled at kissing and lovemaking.
In the same way that Dylan has been really obsessed with his Audi, love is deeply important to Irving.
Nor any higher love.
This verse may have been particularly special to Irving, and he really did give his love to this company, to only then experience an inkling of real love with Bert and have it ripped away from him by this company. Irving gave his all to this belief system, and he was ultimately betrayed by it. A very familiar feeling in the ex-religious and ex-cult community. Irving is a prime example of how the pendulum of dedication can swing hard. This is something that is true in real life. Often people who were extremely dedicated to a religion and then ultimately find out that that religion is false or are betrayed by that cult or religion will then actively turn against the religion, seeking to destroy it. Irving is this person.
Let's burn this place to the ground.
We see him place a deviled egg in the middle of the pages, and then looking the photo of Keir in the eyes, he smashes the egg into the pages, effectively ruining the book. This is a really good example of what people do when they leave a cult. Often the feeling of betrayal is so strong that they will turn against everything they once held sacred. Things like scriptures, religious clothing, church buildings. Irving smashing an egg into the scriptures is a really good example of that kind of behavior. It's a reaction to feeling complete betrayal. Irving once loved these scriptures. He memorized them. For him to turn around and ruin them, that's more than just vandalism. This is Irving becoming completely disillusioned with the cult he was indoctrinated into. And the look on his face after he does this is a look of pure relief, which I love. I find it really interesting that they included this in the story. Also, during the egg bar party, we see Mark and Helly chatting in their little lunchroom. The two are having a cryptic conversation alluding to the plans that they have for this coming evening. Helly asks Mark if he's scared, and he answers yes, because he's scared they're gonna get caught and never be able to wake up again.
They left us unattended and thought we'd be too dumb to notice. They won't see this coming.
They then have a super cute conversation that I'm just gonna show you because it's just cute and I like it.
Or we're all assholes out there.
Well, that's a given for me.
I just hope it turns out I have things I care about.
Helly, do you like me?
You pretended to care about me pretty well.
You're easy to pretend to care about.
As are you.
Ooh, the looks on their faces, the pink lighting in the room. Very clear they have feelings for each other. Later, we get more details about the group's plan for that night. We hear them quietly plotting in the storage closet, finalizing what they're going to do. There's a mention that they need to be prepared for anything when they wake up on the outside.
We will all wake up around people, could be driving or skiing, whatever we do up there.
Dylan, since he already got to have an experience on the outside, volunteers to stay behind and run the overtime contingency protocol.
I've already been out, so it's only fair.
Very noble of you, but I think it's designed as a two-man operation.
Great, I have the strength of 2 men.
This is why Dylan has been assigned to have the waffle party tonight. Meanwhile, Irving, Mark, and Helly are all preparing to wake up randomly on the outside. The ultimate goal is for them to find someone they think they can trust and tell that person about what's going on at Lumen so that they can maybe get some help. After finalizing their plans, Mark pulls out the contraband book from Rickon, and he reads a passage out of it. As Mark is reading this inspirational passage, Dylan joins in the end.
Your so-called boss may own the clock, but
my friends, the hour is yours.
Now revealing to the group that he as well has been reading Mark's book.
Page 197 slaps.
Everyone smiles at each other and it's a super cute moment. Irving, Helly, and Mark walk together to the elevator. Irving walks out first, altering his little catchphrase he says.
Okay, kids. Let's find out what's for dinner.
Helly turns to Mark, asking if she thinks they're about to meet their spouses, speculating that they could potentially be married to each other.
Honey, you're cutting them wrong.
They have a little bit of banter before it's Helly's turn to step into the elevator. She reaches out her hand to stop the door from closing and runs out to kiss Mark. She looks at him with such admiration as the doors are closing.
Good luck out there, boss.
We got a love triangle. We got everything that this teenage dystopian novel needs. Mark is our female protagonist. He's our Katniss, and there's 2 different loves. Who's he gonna pick? He should probably pick Gemma, because they're married, so he should probably pick Gemma. But Mark is 2 different people in one body, and those 2 different people are in love with 2 different people. So I am very curious to see what happens moving forward with that. The Lumen office is being set up for the gala that was mentioned previously. There is a very big, mysterious, important event happening tonight on the regular floor, not the severed floor, obviously. Dylan is escorted by Mr. Milchick to the perpetuity wing, which somehow gets more creepy because they turned the lights off. Thanks. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for making it more creepy. I didn't think you could do that, but I appreciate it. Dylan walks up to the replica of the Kier home. He goes into the master bedroom where there's a small table with waffles on it. 3 perfect looking waffles, and he starts to eat. During this moment, we have a quick flash to Miss Cobell, who is screaming in her car, very angry at Natalie and the board for firing her.
Don't set fucking fire until she fucking dies.
She is having a very understandable mental breakdown. We cut back to Dylan as he's finishing his waffles, and as he takes the last bite, we see that there's a message on the plate that was underneath the waffles. Go now to the founder's bed. And oh my god, this is when it gets so creepy. This is where some of the true cult shines. Sitting on the bed, there is a creepy mask of Kier and a whip with the 9 core principles on it. Dylan puts the mask on and sits down on the bed while dancers in skimpy, flowy, lingerie-esque clothing come in wearing similar creepy masks. And this takes us all the way back to episode 2, when Irving was in the wellness center looking at the painting on the wall of Kier taming the 4 tempers. Again, an example of how we are just drip-fed information in the most perfect, satisfying way, and creepy way, might I add. It's all coming together, isn't it? When Bert and Irving first meet and they're looking at the Tempers painting, they talk about how it used to be in the perpetuity wing. And I think now we know why. It's a perpetuity wing kind of thing, you know? Also, that speech about the Tempers happened in the perpetuity wing. The perpetuity wing is almost like a temple if you will. It's also weirdly sexual, like definitely not appropriate for a workplace environment, you know what I mean? But weird sex things does tend to be a big theme with cults, you know, the charismatic leader for some reason always needs a lot of sex. The music during the Tempers dance is fire, though. These scantily clad masked dancers appear to be doing some sort of theatrical reenactment of this story of their god, Kier. And it's fucking unsettling and creepy as hell. No, no, no. No, 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 no. No, thank you. We cut back to Miss Cobell, who is now in her house destroying, absolutely wrecking her shrine of Kier. She is now feeling a similar sense of betrayal, kind of like what Irving was feeling earlier. As Cobell is wrecking the shrine, there's one thing they focus in on that I find very interesting. It's what appears to be some sort of oxygen tube with a hospital tag on it reading Cobell Charlotte, with a date of birth reading March 17th, 1944. Another speculation here, but I think that this is her mother. The name tag being put on the shrine implies that her mother had something to do with the cult as well. What that is, I don't know, but I just think it's really interesting. We cut back to the dancers finishing up their dance. They look over to the bed and we see that Dylan has left the perpetuity wing. He's now walking through the hallways holding the little black box containing the gift that he received today. We go back to the outside world and see Mark knocking on Miss Cobell's door.
Oh, Mark!
Hi.
Rickon and Devin are holding a very special party at their house tonight and they had invited Miss Cobell to attend. She initially declined the invitation, but Devin asked Mark if he would check in on her and invite her one more time.
I'm sorry, Mark. I'm not feeling quite myself this evening.
She comes to the realization that she could drive herself to the party and leave anytime if she's feeling uncomfortable, which is it's kind of cute how she delivers the line. Like, it's very genuine.
You know, maybe I could drive my own car. And that way I could leave if I'm uncomfortable or afraid.
We see Mark entering Rickon and Devin's house for the party. And he has a brief conversation with Devin about how he's considering potentially a really big life change. Miss Cobell shows up right at this moment and overhears Mark telling this to Devin. She then asks Mark what exactly he meant when he mentioned this big life change. He looks a little bit pleased with himself as he tells Mrs. Selvig, or Miss Cobell, that he intends to quit his job at Lumen. She has a complete look of shock on her face, but Mark then tells her he doesn't think he needs it anymore. He really has processed a lot of the grief he experienced with Gemma and is ready to move forward in his life. Miss Cobell gives him a hug and ominously tells him that he should, in fact, leave the company.
Away from them, Mark.
Intermixed with the scenes at this party, we also get to see Dylan walking into the security office on the severed floor. Dylan opens up his mysterious gift he received today, and we get to see what it is. Dylan requested a glass cube similar to Mark's with his co-workers imprinted into it. We get to talk about the glass cube thing now. Mr. Milchick mentions to Dylan in the previous episode that because he had to activate the overtime contingency on Dylan, he would get a very special perk.
I'm gonna see about wrestling you up some special perks. That sound good?
So I'm assuming this is that very special perk, which ends up being a very special gift for a very special Dylan.
Very special gift for a very special Dylan.
Mark also has one of those glass cubes, and we know that they just gave it to him. I wonder what happened to Mark in order for him to earn a very special gift for a very special Mark. I don't know. Just a thing that I noticed. As Dylan is about to flip the switch and wake up his friends in the outside world, we cut really quickly between Irving painting Mark at the party, and we see one brief glimpse of Helly, who appears to be dressed up wearing some really fancy earrings. Dylan then flips the switch, and the episode ends. Fucking hell, man. It's so good. This is it. The last episode. I'm so excited. The storytelling and the tension building up to this final episode is just amazing, and the reason why I love this show so much. This final episode, they pull out all the stops, man. It's nuts. One of the best episodes of television I have ever seen, but you have to have the buildup to get to this point where this story is so interesting. It just makes this episode a crowning achievement for this show. I'm not going to explain this episode in chronological order because the way that this episode is structured, we have 5 different storylines happening simultaneously. So I'm going to tell these stories one by one in order of insanity, probably. But just know we are being tossed between these storylines throughout the episode, and the way that it's done is amazing, and it's... Just watch the show already.
What?
The episode starts focused on Mark waking up as he's talking to Miss Cobell. There's a pretty intense and drastic shift between Mark's Audi and Innie persona, and Miss Cobell notices it immediately.
You sure you're okay?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just I got a little woozy.
Later on in the party, Mark refers to her as Miss Cobell instead of Mrs. Selvig.
I'll be right back. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Miss Cobell.
Which confirms to her that somehow Mark has become his innie on the outside. There's a moment at the party where Miss Cobell is handed Devon's baby, and as she's holding the baby, everything clicks for her and she realizes what's going on. They do another really mean tease to us and show Miss Cobell just driving away, leading us to believe that she takes the baby with her and everyone is panicking and shit.
I gave her the baby and she left!
She left?
I handed her the baby!
With Eleanor?
She left!
But it was a misdirect. She didn't actually take the baby. They just wanted to scare us for no reason because they're mean. Miss Cobell hops into her car and starts driving recklessly to get to Lumen. She keeps trying to call Mr. Milchick and warn him, but he is actively ignoring her calls because he's been told not to speak with her anymore, which is shunning, which is another cult thing. Fun fact. Finally, after calling Mr. Milchick and getting ignored multiple times, she's able to get a hold of him and yells at him, telling him the innies are out.
They told me not to talk to you.
The goddamn OTC's been triggered!
She figures out that it's Dylan who, after his waffle party, has somehow found a way to activate the overtime contingency. Mr. Milchick is seen frantically running through the halls to get to the security office. When he opens it up, the door is locked with Dylan's belt. Remember how I said Dylan locking the door with his belt was foreshadowing? Yeah, I wasn't kidding. He locks the door again with his belt. Brilliant. I love it. I love that little detail. Mr. Milchick opens the door and calls out to Dylan, asking him to let him in. Mr. Milchick then pulls out a pocket knife, beginning to cut through the belt, promising him crazy incentives, promising he's going to tell Dylan more about his kids and his family if he'll just let Mr. Milchick in.
Just open the door and I'll tell you their names. Come on, Dylan.
Dylan stays defiant, yelling obscenities at Mr. Milchick, and it's awesome.
Fuck you, Mr. Milchick! I want to remember my fucking kid being born!
Another interesting part of this is that to activate the overtime contingency, Dylan has to flip 2 switches on opposite sides of a door, so he's stretched out on a door, his arms are occupied, his glasses are falling down his face, and he's been doing this for about 30 to 40 minutes at this point. He is straining for as long as he possibly can to help his friends. Mr. Milchick is eventually able to cut through the belt, enter the office, and knock Dylan down, deactivating the overtime contingency, returning everything back to normal. So that's what happens with Dylan and Miss Cobell. Let's talk about Irving. Irving wakes up on the outside in the middle of painting. He finally gets to see all the surroundings and view all the paintings that his Audi has been painting for him, I think, to see. Irving walks into the bedroom where he sees his dog Radar. He then pulls a locked chest out of his closet. There's a key he finds in his pocket that he used to unlock the chest. Inside, we see a Navy military uniform with a photo of his father on top of it. Underneath the uniform, there's a hidden compartment filled with maps and papers. As Irving gets a closer look at these papers, he sees that his Audi has been tracking severed workers. He somehow has a list of all the severed workers at Lumen and has some of their addresses, including Bert. Irving takes a map with Bert's location. We see him trying to drive for the first time. He's a little clunky at first, and then it appears that the muscle memory kind of kicks in for him. Irving drives to Bert's house and sees Bert through the window, except he's with another man. Irving looks heartbroken, but still goes to the door to try and have a conversation with Bert. And that's the end of Irving's story for this season. And again, I am so curious as to who Irving is and what he knows. His character is so intriguing to me. I love his character development. But you want to know whose character arc is absolutely the craziest, most insane thing? Freaking Helly. Helly, man. Helly wakes up at the Lumen Gala. Yeah. Dressed all fancy, surrounded by fancy people. And Helly on the outside was in the middle of a conversation with Natalie, the board representative, creepy lady, Natalie. Helly is then introduced to another woman at the gala named Gabby Arteta, who's the politician's wife. Natalie then says to Gabby,
Gabby, this is Helena Egan. My gosh, Helena.
Helena Egan. Yeah, let that sink in. What the fuck? The look on Helly's face as she realizes who she is, you get like, oh, it's perfect. It's beautiful. I love it. But it gets even crazier. Helly walks onto the main exhibit floor of the gala and sees all these big light up photo displays featuring Helly. Featuring her. Whoa. We finally get to see the reason why Mr. Milchick was throughout this season taking so many pictures of Helly on her journey in the office. This also explains the line from episode 2 when Mr. Milchick says,
When we heard you were coming here, it was like a miracle. It's amazing what you're doing.
We see an interview recording of Helly's Audi explaining why she decided to take a job as a severed worker at Lumen. And it's not the words she's saying that matters, it's the tone, it's the feeling of the whole event. Just from what we see, it's apparent that Helena Egan is an extremely influential person in the world.
My dad would love for me to sit here and say that I'm taking this job out of loyalty.
And she took the job as a severed worker as a publicity stunt.
But I took a separate job because it sounds freaking awesome.
To help pass more legislation with all this political goings on. She has a conversation with Angelo Arteta telling her that what she's doing is really important for the world. We also get a confirmation here about Devin's theory about Gabby Arteta.
Wow, 3 kids.
Couldn't have done it without a little help.
Gabby confirms that she was in fact severed during her labor process and didn't have to go through the pain and experience of giving birth because of severance.
I mean, the idea that people would want to outlaw severance.
Oh my god. Helly obviously gets pretty overwhelmed by all of this and goes to the bathroom for a breather. She doesn't get much time though because someone opens the door saying she's in here, and the person who walks in is none other than Creepy McCreepface, current CEO that we had a long holding shot on in the perpetuity wing.
Handsome too. See those brows?
James Egan.
Helena.
James is actually Helly's father. She is the daughter of the CEO. He talks to Helly about how proud he is of what she's doing for the company and for the world. And it is a super unsettling conversation, but it's so cool watching it knowing that it's Helly, not Helena. Mr. Egan tells Helly that he's looking forward to her speech at this event before he exits the bathroom.
Thank you for going through with it. The grandfather would cherish what you've done. You will sit with me at my revolving.
And this moment right here, in my opinion, the most powerful moment of this entire season. After Mr. Egan leaves the bathroom, Helly turns to the mirror and looks at herself.
Forgive me for the harm I have caused this world.
She begins to recite to herself the compunction statement that she read 1,072 times in the break room.
All I can be is sorry. And that is all I am.
This is her moment, okay? It's just so powerful, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I love Helly. Also, in this scene, behind Helly, there's a vase of red roses. Fighting the good fight, bringing out the truth. Like, how cool is Helly's character development? She's the one person on the inside who basically instigated an entire rebellion on the severed floor. And on the outside, she's a fucking heiress to this company. That's so... Like, that's fucking awesome. The shock I felt learning who Helly was on the outside when I watched this for the first time. Goddamn. Anyway, back to this moment that's incredible. Helly. Helly then preps to go on stage for her big speech she's supposed to be given, and she's interrupted by Miss Cobell. Helly tells Miss Cobell, "I'm going to destroy your company," to which Cobell responds,
"Your company? Who the hell do you think you are?"
Cobell then goes on to threaten Helly, telling Helly that if she does this, her friends are going to suffer. For some miraculous reason, Miss Cobell does not actually stop Helly from going on the stage to give her speech.
Thank you, Natalie.
And it's so good!
My name is Helly R. I'm an innie.
She talks about how they're tortured on the severed floor and nothing down there is what they say. And this is the last moment we see of Helly for this season.
We're not happy. We're miserable. We're prisoners!
And you thought that was crazy? You thought that one was crazy? Wait till you hear about what happens to Mark. Initially, Mark wakes up pretty disoriented, trying to figure out his surroundings.
Where am I?
There's a lot of people at this party, which is unfortunate for him. Luckily, he runs into Devin, who starts talking to him. There's a funny moment where Mark is unsure of who this person is and reluctantly calls the baby our baby.
How's our baby?
I'm gonna assume you mean that in the It Takes a Village sense, and she's good. She's hungry.
He then walks up to Rickon's gossipy friends who are talking about Devin and refer to her as Mark's sister.
Absolute angel. That's my sister with the baby?
Exactly, it's his sister.
Luckily allowing him to figure out who she is before it was too late. Mark then finds Devin and asks her if they have a good relationship and if they can trust each other.
This is gonna sound weird. We're close, you and I.
He tells her that he has something very important he needs to talk to her about in private. However, they are interrupted by the party beginning. This party Mark is at is a book reading for Rickon's book. It's perfect. It's perfect. And Mark, any Mark, as we know, has read this book cover to cover probably multiple times. He views Rickon's silly, cheesy, inspirational writing as like a life-changing thing for him. And now he's getting to watch his hero read his favorite book aloud. It's so fun. Also, the shots at this house with Mark at the party, they do a lot of continuous no-cut shots and they are really beautiful, super cool to watch. I'm a big fan. During a reading break, Mark goes up to Rickon telling him how influential he's been and how much he appreciates this book.
The book is brilliant.
Okay, Mark.
No, I mean it. Your book, it opened up the world for me.
Also, they are made of metal, whereas man is made of skin.
Which sparks a conversation about their relationship and how Rickon hasn't always viewed Mark in a positive light since he got the severance procedure. Rickon brings up a memory he had about him and Devin with Mark and Gemma all together on a little hike. He saw a photo from that recently and was reminded of how happy they were back then.
You remember the funny bees?
Mark then asks to see this photo, but is quickly interrupted by Rickon needing to do his neti pot. So, the writers are so mean. Mark then is able to have a private conversation with Devin, explaining to her that he is the innie version of Mark. Devin is really level-headed as she handles this situation.
This is so insane. I think we have to be really careful about who we talk to.
Okay.
She's able to talk to innie Mark about getting him some help, as well as tell him about why Mark chose to have a severed job in the first place.
I just want to know why. Why he put me in there.
Explaining that his wife Gemma passed away and he was too devastated to continue working. Mark then asks about Miss Cobell, who they eventually realize is the same person as Mrs. Selvig.
Her name is Harmony Cobell.
And she works at Lumen?
Yeah, she's my boss.
Which causes Devin to go into a complete panic because she just left her baby with Mrs. Selvig. At this point, Miss Cobell had already driven away from the party. Mark starts to look through the house with one of Rickon's pretentious friends, and they open a door to find the baby perfectly okay in a car seat in one of the closed rooms. The guy that was there with Mark is super funny.
Devin, she's here! I found her!
Claiming credit for finding the baby.
I found your child! I'm the one who found her!
The way that he says it is so good.
I'm the one who found her!
As unnecessary as the panic was, the fact that this all happened with the baby ended up being a really good thing for Mark. As he looks over at a desk in that room he had just entered, and a photograph catches his eye. A photograph of him on his wedding day with his wife, Miss Casey, Gemma Miss Casey. Mark starts running in slow motion, and at this point, we are in the last minutes of this episode. You know, Dylan is about to get knocked down by Mr. Milchick. There's one little thread left on that belt. Time is of the essence.
And everything they told you about Severance is a lie.
I was feeling everything in this moment the first time I watched it. Like, oh my God. This is the part where I was standing up, screaming at the television. You can't do this to me. At the very last possible moment, Mark is able to yell out to Devin while holding the photo of him and Gemma.
She's alive!
It's perfect. What an incredible cliffhanger. What a monumental event for my life. This absolutely was my favorite experience ever while watching a television show. There are few experiences I would say are even comparable to this. And I love that it ended with so much mystery still unsolved, leaving us wanting more for season 2, but they also leave us with just the perfect little amount of hope and resolve that the good guys are gonna win, you know? Oh, it's so good. What do you think of Severance? Is the storyline as cool as I'm hyping it up to be, or am I just full of baloney? If you enjoyed watching this video, you know, if you liked it, give me a like on the video. I'd appreciate it. And I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but at this point it should be a well-known fact that everyone who subscribes to my channel becomes automatically very sexy and very hot. All the sexy and hot is you when you subscribe.
It's not a funeral. So.
Thank you so much for watching this video, especially all the way to the end. And thank you so much for supporting me. Bye!
This isn't like hell or something?
Yes!